This audio presentation of How to Enter the Silence by Helen, Rhode, Wallace, making clear that experience which clarifies perception, intensifies effort, and establishes prosperity, is brought to you by audioenlightenment.com, copyright 2016, all rights reserved. Forward. In order to enter the silence, it is necessary to anchor human intelligence to a higher degree of consciousness. This silence is not an inert, passive state, nor psychism, nor trance. It is a lucid work of the highest spiritual activity. The experience clarifies perception, intensifies effort, creates efficiency, and establishes prosperity. The guarantee of arrival is practice. Do the thing, and you shall have the power. The author. The silence. There is an act of the mind natural to the earnest and the wise, impossible only to the sensual and to the fool, helpful to all who are sincere, which is small place in modern usage, and which few can distinguish from vacuity. Those who knew what it was called in meditation. It is not reading, in which we apprehend the thoughts of others. It is not study, in which we strive to master the known and prevail over it till it lies in order beneath our feet. It is not reasoning, in which we seek to push forward the empire of our positive conception. It is not deliberation, which reckons up the forces which surround our individual lot and projects accordingly the expedient of the right. It is not self-scrutiny, which by itself is only shrewdness. Its views is not personal or particular, but universal and immense. It brings not intense self-consciousness and spiritual egotism, but almost a renunciation of individuality. It gives us no matter for criticism and doubt, but everything for wonder and love. It furnishes immediate perception of things divine, eye to eye with the saints, spirit to spirit with God, peace to peace with heaven. In thus being alone with the truth of thing, and passing from shows and shadows into communion with the everlasting one, there is nothing at all impossible and out of the reach. Let any man go into the silence, strip himself of all pretense and selfishness and sensuality, sluggishness of soul, lift off thought after thought, passion after passion, till he reaches the inmost depth of all. And it will be strange if he does not feel the eternal presence close in upon his soul, and if he does not say, O Lord, art thou ever near as this, and have I not known thee? James Martineau. Note, biblical references are taken from the American Revised Version. Reference herein made to Risebrook and Dionysius, the Arabite, are taken from the old manuscripts edited by Evelyn Underhill. Chapter 1. How to Enter the Silence. A Book of Remembrance. There are those who devoutly seek to harmonize religion and science, who desire to lose neither the pivotal font of spiritual resource called God, nor the knowledge gained in the realm of experience by exact observation and correct thinking called science. The thinking mind seeks laws that lay bare a vital process, laws that can be easily understood and used in living problems, shorn of scholastic technicality and mystery. Experience, not theory, reveals this miracle-moving law. Self-certifying evidence of living contact with the Great Spirit in practical results is the only testimony that can command a mind and heart active in the affairs of the world, yet alive with vision and hungry for truth. Man is today immersed in the scientific spirit. It is the native atmosphere of this generation. He is growing unafraid of ecclesiastical dogma, and is unwilling to accept mere opinion without confirmation from other sources. He seeks with the aid of science to uncover universal laws that shall prove the spiritual ultimates stated by religion. If, through experimental science, man can get to know the nature of the medium with which he has to work, and the means at his disposal to operate it, and can keep his vision on the spiritual ultimates of religion for inspiration and realization, he is in a fair way to relate himself to a creative process which shall invade his life with new powers, insinuating itself into every open channel of activity with practical relationship to all human well-being. Scientific spiritual contact is an earnest of efficiency. Human life is the opportunity for conscious readjustment to a higher order of consciousness, and yet without losing the best that human life has to give, the work, love, family, and national, civic, and social relationships. These are unifying centers for universal evolution. Jesus reproved the man who made no use of talents and capital entrusted to him. He taught the expediency of work, thrift, and investment with legal interest, that service in the world was an imperative as prayer, and that a balanced life required spiritual resource for material achievement. He recognized that mankind had need of many things, and he took infinite pains to teach him how to get these things. He recognized the necessity for suitable clothes and even the value of personal adornment, illustrated in the story of the prodigal son. Jesus' supreme message was man's relation to an invisible and inexhaustible source that can never be spent, and which can be brought to bear upon every detail of human life. He found access to this munificence by means of a filial mental attitude and in silent spiritual communion with the Great Spirit. He perceived an answering intelligence underlying life instantly responsive to man's call upon it, so intimate and personal in its miracle of help as to merit the name Father, so universal, all-pervading, and life-giving as to be called Spirit. He recognized man as a spiritual being in the process of synthesizing his lower and higher natures, and through conscious cooperation man should achieve the next step in biological evolution, spiritual consciousness, through conscious recognition and development of the germ of spiritual life breathed into him in the beginning when he became a living soul. This life lighteth every man as he is coming into the world, John 1:9. Thus is set forth man's spiritual genealogy. No one book can contain all the results of research into human consciousness, the A, B, C of mental states, the application of mental surgery in denials and affirmations, the use of formula, the knowledge of in relationship to unvarying principle. All these various steps are reiterated in each reprint of these well-known facts. The writer leaves the beginner to find his way through the welter of words that attempt to answer his questions. Every beginner is book-mad, hastily scanning 100 books and practicing none, as if the miracle of transfiguration could be achieved through reading about it, instead of a process to work out oftentimes through sweat and blood. But gradually, however, as the mind feeds on living truth, curiosity subsides, and with a new vocabulary and fleeting vision of spiritual homecoming, the student is ready to begin in earnest to recover that record of remembrance between the Great Spirit and the soul. One does not jump into a state of perfect understanding. One grows to it. A working knowledge of any law is gained only by study and practice. Beliefs and tendencies that reflow into consciousness must be reformed in terms of the growing mind. Man drags his whole past with him, transmuting it day by day, inch by inch, as he struggles towards the light. This book does not attempt to include all knowledge within its covers, but it does attempt to point the royal road to the attainment of spiritual consciousness, and for the healing of discord, disease, and poverty through the practice of meditation and the silence. The heart which abandons itself to the Supreme finds itself related to all its works and will travel a royal road to particular knowledge and powers, from Emerson. Abandons itself, that is the difficulty. How shall a man divest himself of the personal self, when the self alone abides regnant in his consciousness? It is impossible except he fix a supreme idea in his mind, and enter into the process of lifting the whole consciousness to the level of that idea. Scientific analysis resolves all elements into a first cause. Statement of science. We are at last face to face with an infinite and eternal energy from which all things proceed and to which all things are related. Statement of religion. In God we live, move, and have our being. These two statements differ only in terminology. Both testify to the unity of everything in the universe, the oneness of all life with man linked to this invisible source. Chapter 2. The Inner Presence. Since the publication of the first edition of this book, further facts concerning the invisible life element have been obtained through scientific research. At a recent meeting of the British Biological Association, a Mr. Ashton exhibited an electrical apparatus which he had perfected, which registered the action of invisible life energy pouring ceaselessly into man, in swords at incredible speed, forming tiny vortices of energy and throwing off electrical particles called electrons and ions, or positive and negative electric force, and revealing the atom, heretofore only inferred to exist, as the first transforming mold through which this invisible life moves into cells, organs, and body. Through all and in all is this empowering life element animating and informing man. To recognize this one fact opens the mind to its inexhaustible resource, and by right mental attitude new energies are released and adverse conditions transformed. Meditation. The Spirit of God at the center of me is a sea of ceaseless energy whose nature is intelligence and well-being. I immerse myself in it. I hold myself receptive to this life element, in breathing this living presence, and through the action of my thought, my consciousness vibrates in unison with its original wave motion, and quickened by my realization of my oneness with its life and law. Living spirit flows through me like electric fluid, imparting its own life and wholeness. My body is likened to a mirror, because it photographs in its living lens a state corresponding to the emotional impulse, as if the emotional counterpart was being reflected as it is being experienced. Consciousness is the vehicle of transformation, and every idea fixed in it reproduces its correspondence throughout all the levels of intelligence of the mind and the body. Experience demonstrates that this energy of God is governed by law, and that man may get to know how to release interior life energy to meet every human need. Science, Professor Henry Bergson. With slight effort we can release more life into the organism, and with increased effort we can release unlimited power. Jesus. From within man the Spirit of God flows forth like rivers of living water. If any man willeth to do his will, he will know of the teaching, whether it is of God, or whether I speak of myself. He knew the law with which he worked would yield the same result no matter who used it. Science, Professor William James. Higher degrees of consciousness reach down and take hold of lower degrees of itself and lift it to its own level. The purpose of meditation and the silence is to reopen this spiritual center within each soul. Spiritual meditation that restores and regenerates requires a focus around which to anchor the whole intelligence. That focus must be something other than the human self. It must be endowed with awareness sufficient to respond to the call of man, with reality sufficient to assure omnipresence, and with power sufficient to awaken faith in its law. To engage and operate this life power for practical results, there are certain laws to which the individual life must conform, failing which there are factors present which inhibit development. In accord with science, one must have a starting point for experiment and investigation defined as a working hypothesis. Accept, then, the word God as a mystical shorthand for prolix and tedious definition. If inherited interpretations fall short of expressing your God, redefine it. The Bible bears witness to the evolution of this word from Genesis to Revelation, unveiling its meaning as mankind evolves to apprehend higher truth. Time presses, the urgency of human needs call for action, and though you should pause here arguing the point for 1,000 years, you would be no further on the path of demonstration. With all the power of resolution command the wavering mind to yield supremacy to the undefinable God, and let the process set in, till new perception dawns, recognition ripens into devotion, love, and mystic union. Fling wide the barriers that separate you from this inexhaustible source, certifying itself as health, intelligence, harmony, efficiency. Sooner or later one must arrive at this pivotal point in life, and affairs are to be transformed. Compelling creative work requires a mind indelibly traced with spiritual law, working always in the spirit of goodwill and justice toward all men. The moral life must be rooted in principle of justice, honor, and truth. Consciously to cooperate in this reproductive miracle, one must know the nature of mental process, and have the capacity and energy to command and manipulate his faculties with persistent and undeviating purpose and precision. He must hark inward to the never-failing, inexhaustible source, the scientific ultimate, call it God or what you will. The picture-making mind requires image and form to fix its ever-flowing state. Idea, objective or subjective, acting in mental substance creates its corresponding image. Meditation fixes and intensifies idea and image through maintaining its stable equilibrium for the transfer of the idea through the inevitable links of the chain until it eventuates into it corresponding external fact. Diagrams act as mental footholds, so that thinking passes logically and unfaltering from a particular fact to a permanent principle with awareness of relationship, thus developing the faculty of reason. Reason enables one to abstract a general principle from a multitude of facts, to classify and correlate facts, so that they may thus become available in the conduct of life. Reason perceives how the law operates in detail, and thus acquires a judgment to use that law in dealing with new and unprecedented situations. Intuition alone gives no power to use that principle in controlling life and conduct. There can be no reason without intuition, but there can be intuition without reason. Wisdom is the product of a perfect balance between reason and intuition. Meditation reinforces and strengthens the reason and quickens insight and intuition with awareness of practical relationships. The sustained attention practiced in scientific meditation involves all the reasoning power and is therefore the foundation of good judgment, character, and the development of the will to command the thinking process in controlling and directing the vast sea of forces which make up man's physical, emotional, and mental life. Accept, then, the working hypothesis of both science and religion. The unseen, undivided flow of inner life, from which all things proceed, into which all things are related, and which empties into the soul of man. Regard man as a living link in the external world united by myriad veils or forms to the infinite and invisible spirit. Realize that the whole purpose of creation was to produce a body capable of responding to higher and higher degrees of consciousness, the germ of which was breathing into the human world. As it was coming into the world, enter into the realization of this universal life now active in man, until growing perception shall open this dark, submerged, rubbish-choked channel from the heart of man straight to the heart of God, forever linking the Great Spirit with its human vehicle. Thus is traced the moving creation to its source, with man united at his roots with God, his machinery of mind fashioned to render immediate response to spiritual activity, designed as an organ of universal consciousness, capable of representing in the world of form a correspondence of original life and intelligence, fitted perfectly to repeat, reflect, and rethink God's thoughts after him. The mask of personality, the soul's machinery for this life, into which is fitted all the intricate inlets and outlets for the working of invisible spirit, may be likened to the mask in which the deep-sea diver is encased as he descends into the unknown, and whose connection with the upper world may be temporarily cut off, and in that momentary isolation he may suffer from nervous collapse. Restore communication with the sustaining life power and equilibrium is the result. The purpose of meditation and the silence is to reopen this spiritual highway and provide within man's interior being a center for the activity of higher degrees of life and consciousness. Science. The more evolved intelligence uses the lower intelligence and changes it into its own likeness by a mysterious quickening process which is inward, silent, hidden, and of which we have no knowledge except by comparison with successive states. Religion. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him, and will sup with him, and he with me. Science. Professor Bateson, President of Biological Association, England. The higher power in man are not due to something added, but to the absence of factors which inhibit their development. They are releases of power heretofore suppressed, the instrument in there, but it is stopped down. Ignorance, fear, and discord are the barriers that stop down the action of original life and intelligence. Know the truth of man's relationship with his source, and that truth shall set him free from disease brought about by his false beliefs. Passive assent to any doctrine leaves one in a mere vocabulary resting upon words and creeds. A living truth that can be tested leads to active experience, by means of which man receives the result of his belief, and by virtue of which he enters into a permanent living relationship with an omnipresent, active intelligence called God. Scientific meditation is the means to stir this life-giving energy into activity. Thus man can be in himself a living witness to the divine miracle. Steadfast, persistent endeavor, even through 1,000 failures, is the record of the captivity of steam and electricity brought into the service of man. God is a God of knowledge. There is no magic about it. It is the working out of knowledge and law moving into manifestation through a chain of advancing impulses of calculable, definite, and inevitable sequences. Get into position and let the process set in. Reduce vague, disjoined, unorganized thinking to sharp, defined statements, and compel action to accord with thinking. Waste no time in mere argument and speculation. Do, and you shall know, and doing always precedes knowing. We lie in the lap of immense intelligence which makes us organs of its activity and receivers of its truth. When we discern justice, when we discern truth, we do nothing of ourselves but allow a passage to its beams. Emerson. In accord with this statement, regard the human machinery as an organ of God's consciousness, a distributing center for original and perfect life, designed in the beginning, in the creative order as a part of the originating cause of the universe. It may be likened to an automatic lens filming any idea held in the focus of attention. When the thought rests only in the outer personality and existent confusion, the discordant vibration reflect as inharmony disease. The self-induced pictures leave them devoid of the image and likeness of divine impulse. Through identifying with ideas that steady the mind, man has the power to shut out destructive ideas and substitute harmonious ones. The undertow of subconscious race tendencies has little chance in a mind self-governed. Nothing short of daily spiritual immersion in the chemical waters of reality will dissolve discordant films and open the way to pure knowing. Such a cleansing is meditation. Meditation is a process of denuding the mind of ignorance by enthroning high ideas, which shall, by daily energizing, become powerful vibratory centers, dominating and readjusting the entire organism. Such a method leads to mental lucidity, a dynamic state of mind which includes both the knowledge and the power to fill an idea with substance and with awareness of being. In the self, the process of bringing a desired state to pass. That state of mind is called faith. This is no mere passive belief state. It is the highest state of mental and spiritual activity, an active state of the highest spiritual potential. Faith is giving substance to a thing not seen. Faith is not an intellectual belief in something or someone, but a state of consciousness capable of transforming an invisible idea into living existence. Faith is the mental equivalent of intellect, hands, and technique, calling into being things that are not, creating the invisible form and content of a thing, moving it forward into existence by laws inherent in mental force. One can get to know how to give substance to a thing not seen. Meditation is the living ground, and thinking a thing gives substance to it. God calleth the things that are not as though they were. Endure as seeing the invisible. Jesus. Believe that ye have received, and ye shall have. When a man understands the nature of the process his thought is undergoing in the act of creative thought, he knows that he is receiving the spiritual counterpart of his idea. The law governing any force is the logical process through which that force is controlled and directed, and spiritual law is no exception. Physical experiment is written so large on the face of the universe that results to be obtained wholly by mental means seem vague, but only so to the beginner who is yet to witness the law operating through his word. Giving substance to a thing yet uncreate is to endow it with power. A thing becomes endowed with power when it becomes saturated with conscious, intelligent activity. No one but a human being can endow a thing with substance, simply because the human being is the process that converts substance into things. To manipulate the mental field for the disposition of substance, the whole consciousness must fuse into a state of knowing, a creative mood called faith. Man is well nigh lost in his objective senses. He cannot see, handle, touch, nor taste faith. Therefore it must be removed from the objective plane, and it must be one of the elements that enter into subjective creative cause. Within one's own being is manufactured all of color, tone, quality, influence, beauty, and endurance of the thing desired. Within man lies latent all the elements that combine to create the fulfillment of desires. So dynamic it is that Paul said, "It is a conviction of things not seen." He also said, "Try your own selves whether ye are in the faith. Prove your own selves. Before faith came, we were kept inward under the law." Man cannot be trusted to do invisible work until he learns how to act from principle, and he is taught through punishment and suffering, and his wrong methods and mistakes corrected by means of laws operative on this material plane. Man must earn the right to carry his affairs into spiritual currents by offering adequate, transforming mental machinery. Two things must possess affinity if they are to unite, and the state of man's mental machinery profoundly affects spiritual activity. Faith is a supreme kind of thought force that is reinforced on all planes of man's being, having its foundation resting upon the laws of justice, goodwill, and right action in external performance, rightly related to the mental field and thought, and anchored spiritually to the one source of life, wisdom, and supply. Such an electric charge of high potential sets up intercommunication linking atom with atom as one united intelligence throughout the universe, and is as real a force as the Gulf Streams, and which insinuates, overbears, and surmounts the universal ether, holding its integrity until fulfillment comes. Man lives in a universe, not a diverse, and every atom of it bears a definite relation to every other atom, designed to act in mutual service, dependence, and balance. Meditation is the process of saturating the human dynamo with potential energy able to reach throughout the universe for fulfillment. Creative work requires the mold of an idea set in superhuman power and intelligence and held there in burning ardor till its inward fire fashions its correspondence on the outer plane. To enter the silence is to enter this living, glowing, incubating chamber, radiant with rejuvenating life beyond the ebb and flow of human clamor and agitation. When the mental field is alive with this creative miracle, one is said to be in a state of faith, a dynamic mental mood that removes mountains of difficulties, subdues kingdoms, works righteousness, stops the mouth of lions, quenches the power of fire, escapes the edge of a sword, and from his weakness is made strong. Nothing is achieved until the mind is captured. Consciousness has ebbed and flowed for ages, brought under restraint or harnessed for action only it is driven by work, and when the work in hand is accomplished, reverting to the subconscious drift. It is to this undeveloped marginal of mental life that there is need to apply effort. Thought should not be allowed to subside in automatic, uncontrolled subconscious undercurrents. Constructive ideas should fill all the margins of life. This is the office of the will, to determine to do it, and behold, the thing is done. Moral and spiritual vicissitude is won only after hard struggle. Remnants of the ape and tiger still crouch beneath the surface. They should be brought before the conscious mind and re-educated. The ways of wisdom are countless. A living knowledge of nature and experience is necessary to confirm, strengthen, and support feeble initiative. Training and technique organize the intelligence for efficiency and human relationship. Law lays the foundation for trustworthy action. Finally, there is fixed in the soul a moral integrity that discerns between the real and impermanent almost involuntarily. Discursive, rambling reading and thinking is brought to judgment, and the spiritual process sets in. The surface self-conscious mind is the medium for response to sense impressions and experience. When an experience is powerful enough to arouse deep emotion, that impression is carried deep into mental process defined as the subconscious mind. This mental field can be protected from adverse influences, operated and directed, and become a powerful factor in creative work. The superconscious mind can become active in the conscious mind by right mental attitude. The commanding ego is the self-conscious mind standing midway between its higher and lower selves, having the power to open and close the interior lines of communication. These three aspects of consciousness have no abrupt divisions, but flow and reflow into each other. The self-conscious mind commands and directs the subconscious mind, invokes and becomes receptive, not negative, inert, and willless, to the power it invokes into the superconscious field. Every aspect of consciousness behaves in a certain definite way, knowledge of which offers the means to accelerate individual progress, which in turn reacts upon all human relationships and universal progress. Concentration is the first step towards getting control of these diverse mental currents, bringing them to a focus for direct and unified action, for the forward movement on the spiritual highway leading to the silence. Science. No two things can occupy the same place at the same time. Two mental laws. The law of inhibition. Every idea tends to prevent the production or development, or to cause the disappearance of ideas, which cannot be united to itself according to the law of systematic association for a common end. The law of association. Every idea causes to develop the subconscious fact, and tends to associate to itself ideas which may harmonize with it towards the common goal. Religion. I will bring upon this people the fruit of their thoughts. Within the inner sanctuary, in a still supernal silence, every thought must be brought captive to ideas of perfect states, and held by mental and spiritual affiliations, never by force nor by external will power, but by attention to the undivided presence of the one idea. Concentrate with the mind and relax the body. With practice, concentration passes into meditation, and then into the silence, and in time becomes effortless. Learn to let go in a very positive manner. By mental argument and denial, delete from the consciousness all discord, and with adequate treatment, wash the mind clean of destructive ideas, fixing truth ideas in their place and believing them into life. Each individual organism is a fully equipped powerhouse with the self-consciousness, the ruling power at the central station, selecting and distributing incoming impulses and impressions. If man is only half alive, unaware of his great office, the mental and spiritual faculties are weak from non-use, the will flabby, and he is unable to challenge the horde of intruders that pass the barriers intended to protect the vast reproductive fields of subconscious mind. With his qualities of self-government unexercised, he degenerates into a slave of subconscious, uncontrolled emotions. The racial deposits of evolutionary experience, as it is yield response to the tiger, ape, and hyena instincts, reflow across the thresholds of self-conscious mind. This host of unregenerate tendencies snarl in selfishness or whine in self-pity, pouring their hot fires of passion and greed into the self-conscious mind, coloring all its judgments, intensifying its fear, and paralyzing right action. To clean up this whole field, the first step is to use the wireless code that operates between the self and subconscious called self-suggestion. Denial and affirmation define a method of cleansing the mind and establishing a mental attitude that shall automatically reject the false and retain the truth by constantly suggesting the truth to the inner mind. Science. There is always some kind of consciousness going on. There is a stream, a succession of states of desire or feeling that constantly pass and repass that constitute our inner life. Every impression that runs into it from the skin or eye or ear runs out again in the muscles, glands, or viscera, and builds or tear down vital processes through the invisible path of escape, the nerve currents, and which remain more or less permanent features of its structure, modifying its action through all future time. Every idea completes its circuit in the body. Peculiar modes of excitement in the brain leave a sort of tenderness or exalted sensibility behind them, which may take long periods to die away. As long as it lasts, these tracts are liable to have their activities awakened by causes which at other times might leave them in repose. Every experience of deep feeling leaves its combination of emotion impulses linked together, lying latent in subconscious substance, and at any time, when one element of an experience is suddenly brought forward into the focus of attention, quick as a flash, the whole experience is reproduced mentally, unless inhibited or transformed by a conscious process of mental and spiritual re-education. When the individual awakens to the truth of his spiritual nature and destiny, and consciously enters upon definite means to clean up his subconscious depth, he will stand guard at the door of conscious thought, rejecting and reversing, not ignoring, every intruder to the well-being of his mental and physical life. The subconscious mind cannot accept an entirely new idea with which it cannot establish relationship through previous experience or education. In concentration, whatever idea is to be developed, reason, discuss, discriminate, and argue mentally about it until you deliberately choose the condition to be developed. This voluntary chain of interest gives logical sequence to the operation of the subconscious mind, and in the words of Professor William James, when an idea is passed into the subconscious mind with interest and attention, and an impetus given to it by concentration, in that moment the subconscious mind springs upon that idea like a wild beast upon its prey, and deep into subconscious research one idea connects with another. Apply this law to the working of fear and worry ideas that flash from brain to nerves until every muscle of the body is quivering with fear ideas, or when encouraged and quickened under the glow of kindness and spiritual perception by the use of ideas of truth, love, and harmony, the nerves are hushed in peace and wholeness. A useful mind depends upon the number of ideas at its command. If powerful, good, well-organized ideas are in the mind, the isolated ideas of evil are easily rearranged and overruled. The subconscious mind is continually choosing among the ideas presented to it according to the law of association, for mental activity is automatic and persistent. Man can take the initial step by introducing an idea, creating an interest in it, and passing it with intention to the subconscious mind. Then the subconscious mind becomes a silent warrior, working with unceasing zeal to complete the work begun by the conscious mind. The secret of an efficient mind is to have it under the control of a spiritually developed will, able to unify all the faculties, using them for a single purpose, and holding them in a single focus. Without the power of concentration, one is the tool and slave of external forces and automatic habits, like a straw in the wind driven hither and thither by conflicting emotions, scattering the life force in unproductive thought and action. Risebrook. A single intention draws together the scattered powers. A single intention is beginning and end of all virtue. Concentration upon one idea, even for a few moments, fixes mental action, produces intense vividness in the focus of consciousness, unifies the mind, gives clearness, lucidity, and vigor to the thinking process. Consciousness, then, instead of being diffused over a wide area, yielding vague and blurred impressions, is brought to a focal center, yielding clear and definite ideas charged with life and power. Science. The slightest thought changes the brain structure, leaving its telltale work. Concentration is of two kinds, objective and subjective. In objective concentration, the mind is focused on external objects and concrete images. In subjective concentration, the mind is fixed on an abstract idea or a truth statement. Let the student be patient, determined, and persistent, regarding the lower mind as his working partner to be disciplined and trained to perfect obedience. Every time the mind wanders, bring the drifting attention back gently, easily but firmly to a central idea. Strive constantly to think inward toward the center of being where truth abides in fullness. This opens the door of the superconscious mind, and the deeper the idea is carried into the finer forces, the greater its intensity and power. When mentally assorting ideas for concentration, let this thought float in the margin of consciousness. The infinite intelligence illumines and directs me, thus reminding the imprisoned soul of its never-failing source, lifting it from its self-limitations to divine munificence. The more the emotions are enlisted, the easier concentration becomes. Science. William James. Take care to launch yourself with as strong and decided an initiative as possible. Accumulate all the possible circumstance which shall reinforce the right motive. Put yourself assiduously in conditions that encourage the new way. Make engagements incompatible with the old. Envelop your resolution with every aid you know. Reverse every adverse thought. Character is the moral deposit of 1,000 struggles, and every good that is worth possessing must be paid for in strokes of daily effort. Professor William James. New habits can be launched. A new and regenerate nature can be built up through new associations, new experiences, new impulses. Regeneration depends upon the ideals active in the mind to arouse the emotions and stimulate the will to determine action in accord with it. Consciousness is essentially an associated machine. Voluntary and purposeful thinking organizes the subconscious mind into an effective instrument and endows the higher emotions with expulsive power, so as automatically to reject false thought. With each new ideal that comes into life, the chance of life based on some old ideal will vanish. The subconscious depth is a vast charnel house of the immemorial past. In it is stored up all the experiences of all life through vast eons of time in the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdom, and all of human experience up to the level of present self-consciousness. Strange remnants of a forgotten past awake from time to time and reflow into consciousness, or events suddenly uncover long, slumbering passions. This reflow is to be regarded as merely automatic wheels going around, not the real man at all. Man possesses two invisible arms of mighty power, subconscious and superconscious mind, that draw from illimitable space all necessary aid, that connect with ways and means to deliver from evil and to prosper right effort. S. McComb in Hibbard Journal. The action of the heart, circulation of the blood, secretion of the glands can be effected through influence brought to bear upon the subconscious. It is to the process of affecting the subconscious that the term suggestion is applied. We know that a few words can unlock pent-up energies, remove mental and moral inhibitions, and unify disassociated states of consciousness. We should guard our subconscious field from any suggestion that is not beneficial, and we do this by taking the law of suggestion into our own hands and continually voicing to the inner self the truth of being. To affirm is to suggest. Develop faith in divine resource and law to the high point of authority, that you may speak with conviction to an obedient sub-mind. Man is equipped with high and lower vehicles capable of working for him while he sleeps. The whole past self is destined to rebirth. Man is expected to recover his submerged past, to immerse it in divine life and truth, thus to reinform and regenerate it. Concentration is a mental pruning knife that cuts away useless thoughts and tendencies. Concentration upon truth statement enables one to summon mental and spiritual resources at will and be delivered from adversities. Concentration upon principle stabilizes and cleanses the mind, and the old rule for prayer should be applied here. And once a day at least, preferably before going to sleep, immerse the mind in affairs in harmonious currents that shall bear them above discord and conflict. Peace of mind and prosperity in business demanded. Memory can be recovered and strengthened upon eternal truth. Memory cannot be lost, but it can be submerged under useless and annoying details. Memory is not a separate faculty. Experience cuts its track through brain substance, leaving its record there as memory. One says, "The cares of yesterday, I cannot let them go. One wronged me yesterday and I can't forget." The you who was wrong yesterday have passed into today. No one can fetter you. No, you are a free spirit. The one who initiates adverse action is bound to it until it is remitted and dissolved. But you can refuse to connect with anyone's adverse action. It belongs to the perpetrator. Preserve the pages of your life for truth and its manifestation. Refuse to carry over the mistakes of yesterday. If they are yours, take every means to rectify them. If they are another's, refuse to build them into today's life. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. Not because of favor, but because cause and effect is a cosmic law. Affirm 100 times a day, God, good alone governs me, no other presence, no other power, and go forward doing and believing good, thus bringing it to pass by thinking it. Thinking generates a peculiar kind of force, always the counterpart of the idea held in the mind. Concentration is defined as the process of intensifying action through removing weakening or adulterating elements. One concentrates easily upon what one loves. One is brought into involuntary concentration when absorbed in beautiful music. These infrequent moments of loss of the sense of self is the kind of experience one must have when voluntarily turning from discord to harmony, from false impressions to spiritual reality, wrapped in contemplation, unified with high vibratory force. The truth that heals ignorance and discord lies at the root of pure being in simple reality. Spiritual knowing is walled in behind mental fog. Therefore, concentration upon God truth. Deny the reality of their opposites and let the action of God take place. Concentrate upon truth. Wisdom, God, and the hidden good will be uncovered, whether it be health or possessions. Concentration is a creative act. One idea held in the focus of consciousness sharpens the mind to the point, and the mental image is impressed throughout consciousness. One does not have to agonize, but to realize. Let one idea carry the mind inward. Go with it. Look away from all adverse appearances to perfect reality. In this most high place all ways and means are connected, and the outer mind impressed and directed. Spiritual repose is the nature of superconscious life. Cease to cloud it by fuss and fret. Submerge yourself in that sea of harmony. Relax. Take hold of eternal truth, and you need never labor to let go of anything. Alien elements drop off themselves. Expand inwardly. Perceive the inner splendor. Rest in that. Concentration is not a mere word. It signifies a state of mind. Do these things, and that state of mind is achieved. One of the wrong factors usually introduced in mental work is fear. Fear is not a thing in itself. It is developed by ideas of worry and impatience. Develop understanding, faith in original life and its laws. At the slightest hint of discord, throw yourself into this revivifying fountain of life. Fix a mind upon the conquering inner life and intelligence, and let fear go as freely as you would open your hand to release a bird. The mental life needs continual harmonizing. Affirm, I think only the words that are spirit and that are life. At the roots of my being, I am pure spirit, endowed with every means for a complete and efficient life. Then as earnestly search the mind to uproot egotism and selfishness. Sometimes at the back of the mind are thought habits a little overactive, as self-pity and oversensitiveness. The antidote is to contemplate their opposites, unselfishness and goodwill, and act in accord with the idea. Every thought enters into the creative process of life, and when little whirlpools of adverse thought are created in the stream of life, All the mud, sticks, and stones that float in that stream are drawn into these whirlpools, and they strike us as accidents, loss of valuables, fits of temper, interference, and contention. Every adverse thing that happens is a voiceless warning. Overcoming power follows the realization that within man is the power to turn all things to good account. 3 groups of self-adjusted bonds hold man in mental slavery. 1. Indolence, ignorance, and self-love. 2. Aggressiveness, haste, self-importance. 3. Demanding rewards, exercising authority, condemnation, self-pity, self-righteousness. All these await transmutation, consumed by the power generated in spiritual meditation. Transformation takes place within man. He himself is the machinery. Not by might, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. There is no condition so unpromising as not to offer opportunity for the development of spiritual and practical efficiency. When Sarah Bernhardt was injured in a motor accident and had to have her leg amputated, her career seemed ended. But supported by unconquerable resolve, she fitted herself to the part of a one-legged soldier. The oyster transfigures its grain of irritation by reclothing it in its own emanations. That which threatened wreck becomes the source of its highest value. It refuses the grain of sand as an irritant, and acceptance forces a new product, born of hidden resources that glorify its drab life with a precious jewel reflecting heavenly tints. Contemplate your thought as a tangible seed. Take it with your mental hands and plant it in your mental soil. Pour upon it love, warmth, and protection. Reject every intruding adverse influence that would overcome your growing idea. Hover over your seed thought in contemplation, and grow it into maturity through loving it into life. Exalt the common things of life and spiritualize existence. Do not delay your good by trying to coerce persons, but create new conditions out of the inexhaustible infinite substance that can never be spent. Man does not have to persuade God, but he does have to persuade himself to enter into communion with the substance of life, to learn the law, and to speak the word that shall set the cosmic elements into motion to bring his good to pass. Resolve. This one thing I do, I will increase my power to think, to know, to surmount difficulty, to increase my efficiency. I will spiritualize existence. I will to realize that I am the captain of my soul. Intelligence, right judgment, harmony, wholeness, prosperity are mine through God who is my life. Thought is a force, and that force is not annihilated simply because one may not choose to recognize it. To ignore discordant conditions, therefore, does not readjust them. Every false claim must be met by special denial of its reality and truth, affirming the truth as it ought to be. No general denial will answer, because there are in the mind certain discordant ideas and conditions, each requiring specific argument in order to break down and stop its action. Because the mental life seems hidden, one assumes that secret vices, vicious temper, and immortal thought are safely walled in and incapable of harm, while the fact is, there is no fence for thought. It interpenetrates all barriers, marring or aiding all plans, contaminating or cleansing the mental life of the world. The mental field has got to be brought under right law exactly as physical action has been disciplined. It is to his mental life that man must apply himself to uproot, eject, and destroy all false thought by a denial of its reality and of all fear regarding it, and in the same breath reversing and substituting ideas representing desired conditions. Denial of evil in all its form with argument and affirmation of the spiritual foundation of man undermines and breaks down the development of adverse ideas together with their external pictures in the body. Denials and affirmations are states of mind, not a form of words. Words afford mental footholds to steady the mind until it is stabilized in a positive attitude which involuntarily rejects destructive thought. Argument. There is no discord in divine in-person life. Therefore, this discord is the outworking of some false belief, and I perpetuate it by mental repetition. I resolve to dissolve this false belief from my mind, and to substitute a perfect idea every time an adverse thought seeks entrance. Therefore, I will feed mentally upon the truth of the one life, which animates and informs me, and in which I live, move, and have my being. I will to recognize only God and his manifestation. Harmony, wisdom, wholeness, joy, these only will I think into my life. In like manner, disconnect the mind from all undesirable states and conditions, and reinforce argument by right action. Worry, self-pity, impatience, fear, all come up for judgment. These are man's adversaries, and for efficient treatment man agrees with his adversary quickly. He should not ignore it, so that he may determine what he must do to separate himself from its claims and pluck it out by the roots. The intruder must be met and antidoted. There is work to do. Jesus did not find this work an effortless adjustment. He learned obedience to the things which he suffered. In all treatment begin at the fountainhead. In the beginning God, and by scientific argument relate the external organism to its source. Know only one mind at work, God. Deny the reality of all false thought, and let the action of God take place. Be calm, use your vision and your word, and rest in law. Reiterate and reaffirm the ever-flowing fount of life and wisdom from the fountainhead to be appropriated by man in whatever form he determines. Be one-pointed, one-minded, identify with the idea, and manifestation will take care of itself. How to enter the silence. Take hold of a whole consciousness and thrust it forward with naked intent stretching to God. Better to have the eyes of the soul open in contemplation than to behold all the angels and saints in heaven. Dionysius, 5th century. The peace that passes understanding is a peace that is brought about by conquest of the self, of its perpetual discord and ignorance. It is an active peace that has wisdom and power in it. Now grasp this well, whoever means God must have God present in his mind under some godly attribute, as truth, wisdom, wholeness, harmony, etc. Risebrook. To enter the silence means to turn the mind inward, focusing the mind upon a God word, meditating upon it, and until the spirit of that word flashes into reality, and the mental field is alive with it. These God words are herein called the God positives. Invisible lines of connection link the inner with the outer world. Jesus said, "My words are spirit." One must carry thought past the mere forms of letter to spiritual reality symbolized by the word. These words release corresponding force exactly as push buttons release electricity. Science. Professor William James. Under certain conditions there is an influx of a higher order of consciousness. Something from above takes hold of the lower part of itself, quickening it with a new morality, often utterly recreating the outer man. Religion. Beholding the glory of the Lord, contemplating perfection, we all, reflecting as a mirror, are transformed into the same likeness, as though the mind was a photographic plate and meditation a time exposure. Concentration precedes meditation, and is an act of the will bringing all the faculties into captivity, narrowing the focus of attention to one point, and from that point, other conditions being equal, there ensues involuntarily its very opposite, a vast expansion of consciousness. Even the fixed center vanishes. This expansion is a step in transcendence. This is the creative mood for readjustment and healing. Anything less than this dynamic state is of the lower levels of personal willpower, suggestion, and hypnotism. To enter the silence signifies the silencing of all unreality, of doubt, fear, false beliefs, worry, complaining, grief, of everything that is merely of the outer personality, and remaining fixed in the revivifying fires of inpouring, restoring life. Science. Henri Bergson, France. Fix the attention upon the undivided flow of inner life. We are not this vital current itself, but we are part of this inpouring life come to self-consciousness. Concentration leads to the threshold of the silence, and except regenerating fires within the soul light the way, one will never be able to cross the threshold. To get into a mental subjective state in order to concentrate upon shrewd business methods, to stimulate personal influence, to coerce others and to aggrandize self, leaves one in the reign of conflict and force, relying wholly upon the personal mind. Meditation is a state of lucidity brought about by a combination of factors that closes the door of the outer world and opens the being to the influx of higher knowledge and power, which impart their wisdom at the point where thought and effort are active. Divine wisdom and efficiency is not limited to a form of words, but is expressed in the universal vocabulary of experience, reinforcing human effort at the moment when decisions and effort are put forth, exactly timed for the hour of need. Hence the mistake of expecting immediate verbal answers to problems. Words are the external expression of inner states. The inner state is the point requiring readjustment, and the outer expression of words follows as a natural sequence of its own plane. The great need is to treat by scientific denial each false claim, affirming the truth as it ought to be, and let the action of God take place at the right time. For the word, expression of God, is living and active, and sharper than any two-edged sword, and piercing and quick. Treat, affirm, and rest in confidence that the action of God is taking place. Divine wisdom and efficiency is the third arm that is brought into operation when man's two arms and brain have fulfilled their purpose. The silence is a tempting word to the lazy mind, thinking to enter a do-nothing state without method or effort, and to remain there, inert and passive, receiving deific gifts. Knowledge has never been vouchsafed to anyone who is inert and ignorant of the laws of the element he desires to use, either in the realm of mind or spirit. Every step in advance forces advance in conscious intelligence and right use of the will in compelling individual application. To strike out the will and sit in a state of subjective passivity, developing mental emptiness, leads to physical wreck, mediumship, and obsession. Loss of health and financial failure is the inevitable result. To achieve the silence requires lucid work of the highest activity, demanding time, study, and practice, and signifies a spiritual quickening contact with the source of life. One should not attempt the practice of meditation when fatigued or sleeping. The work requires conscious possession of all the faculties with discerning cooperation, and should not be left to the last remnants of the day, hastily seeking some refuge in a form of words. Such attempts are a mere delusion. Physical stillness alone will not open the inner doors to supermind. Mental stillness alone may be only vacuity. But when physical and mental stillness is the result of scientific concentration, bringing into captivity all the faculties through the undivided attention to the one idea, the conditions are ripe for the higher states of meditation and of the silence. One cannot concentrate on nothing. To concentrate on circles, the point of a lead pencil, candle flames, or a crystal, is to deflect the mind into unrelated channels rather than to lead it to become one-pointed in vibrant, creative ideas, which, according to psychological law, must find connecting links throughout consciousness, if the subconscious mind is to create corresponding condition. Risebrook. Now mark this well. When a man wishes to possess inward rest and idleness, then he is ready for all errors. A small consolation may greatly rejoice him, for he knows not what he lacks. The rest which he finds consists in his own idleness, to which he is inclined by nature and habit, and he falls into a self-complacency from which he seldom recovers. This sinking down into subjective passivity in bare vacancy is a caricature of the perpetual willed effort required in inward contemplation. This bare vacancy may be found by all men, but it is but a psychic trick to precipitate the consciousness into a subjective state. There is a world of difference between subjective nothingness and the high activity of spiritual intelligence. God is activity, not passivity and idleness, but an eternal striving. There are well-worn paths on the spiritual highway, with the ascent clearly indicated and with accompanying experience certifying divine union. There are signs accompanying every stage in the soul's great adventure, and none of them rest in psychic phenomena, nor on the astral plane, nor in a trance. Risebrook. Spiritual gifts come from within in union with spirit, and not from without into the imagination by means of sensible images. St. John of the Cross, 14th century. I am terrified by what passes among us in these days, persons who know nothing of the illuminative way, whose life is unpurged of selfishness, say, God has spoken to me, or it was revealed to me, or I am chosen. But it is not true. Such a one has been speaking to himself. Self-interest causes him to reply to himself, and then to imagine that God has spoken. Visions, voices, and mental pictures we must fly from. All bodily appearances are obstacles in the way. Hilton. The less the soul thinketh that it seeth God, the nearer for to perceive divine love. Madame Guyon. It is very important to prevent souls from resting in visions and voices, for this may check them for their whole lives. Corporeal visions are the least spiritual of all and the most subject to illusion. St. Angela of Foligino. The eyes of the soul do behold spiritual and not a bodily presence. Dionysus. Quaint sounds and smells and light, all is less than spirit knowing. Work not with these. Mental images proclaim the lower levels of consciousness. The intellectual machinery cannot act on the spiritual plane. It is the recording machinery of the sense mind, and its blindness is a psychological necessity on the higher planes of perception, in order that the instrument designed for each forward step in the projection of the creative process may do its appointed work. The outer eye cannot function on the mental plane. Thou canst not behold me with thy two outer eyes. I have given thee an eye divine. As objective sight is superseded by mental perception, so also is the action of superconscious mind. Spiritual cognition, or pure knowing, supersedes mental perception. To see on any plane with definition and understanding requires training. A child cannot distinguish objects clearly under 5 years of age. Years of training are required to relieve mental and moral blindness. There is thought life in the soul to be communicated and experienced, and to receive which one must attain to a state of consciousness above self-thought images. Henri Bergson. Behind the mental state lies a vast region of perceptions and correspondence which elude the image-making powers of the surface consciousness. The more transcendent the perception, the less of it will the image contrive to represent. Patanjali taught that there was a condition reached in spiritual meditation, where there was a cessation of the transformation of the thinking principle, and perception and spiritual quickening became immediate. The silence is that state of coordination of the different parts of the human mechanism as to render this result possible. The will must lift the self out of its lethargy and carry the consciousness above the emotional contagion of the lower sense mind. Rysbroek calls the will king of the soul. It is the faculty by which the mind makes choice of its action and directs the energy to their fulfillment. It is the governor of the entire organism, designed to command and transform negative states of mind into the self. It has been thought that only a passive mind with annihilation of the will was a necessary state for divine approval. Deity can do nothing with will-less persons. He needs a dedicated will to act from principle and not a machine to be driven. Professor Henri Bergson, France. The abnormal person continually lags behind the continual pressing forward movement of spirit, always with the past, unable to keep step with progress. The abnormal person is the result of a negative will moving round a center, while the normal person moves through an experience and conquers it and is quit of it, and is ready moment by moment for more life, ready to become knit in the law of spirit, and by deliberate choice will to enter into the renewing creative process. Entering into the silence is not an intellectual theory. It is a physical, mental, and spiritual act of the very highest order, and involves emotion, will, and action. Many sink into a passive, subjective silence merely to enjoy sensuous quietism and the unsubstantial fancies of imagination. This is sensual self-indulgence, and because there is absence of willed effort, the subconscious impulses of the lower nature may assert themselves and lead to psychic delusions and emotional orgies, preventing any rise in superconsciousness. Moral and spiritual rectitude is won only after hard struggle. In the beginning, while the elemental emotional satisfactions are undergoing refinement and the sense is still dominant, there may be experienced a sensible delight in the effort toward harmonious rhythm. Check any tendency toward bodily sensation by lifting the focus of meditation to the brain center, thus bringing the emotions under control of the will. Purification is a continual process and calls for perpetual fires burning on the altar of the heart, consuming the dross of unworthy aims and self-delusion. Only after long and repeated failures is man ready for this culminating work of divine union. Unyielding conditions in the personality and environment alone compel it. In walking the high path, pain and suffering will be experienced, but it will be growing pains with an accompanying sense of victory. And while suffering is not the purpose of spiritual activity, purification is, and no one passes through purifying fires without sacrificing. Each age makes its own peculiar contribution to the revelation of God to man. The Oriental mind seeks in seclusion and refusal of action in the world to attain to the state of non-attachment to things. Christian mysticism recognizes that the soul is perfected here by means of experience in the right use of things. Jesus rejoiced that in the midst of life he had achieved the miracle of transcendence. I have overcome the world, and he conditioned his glory upon having lived his life tested in the world by every known means. He admits that he was straitened in the process. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how I am straitened till it be accomplished. He fully recognized the place and purpose of man's temporary experience on this planet by using it as a means of spiritual growth. Every step on that quest has been filmed to an all-eternity and thrown upon the cosmic screen, a living testimony of the way of spiritual evolution. To all theory, ritual, or phrase makers, there is but one answer: a life lived, a miracle certainly, yet no mystery. A primary duty of service in the world and some worthy work is required of the spiritually developed. Doing leads to further knowing. Experience is needed to draw out the soul's interrogation. Have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who counted not the being on equality with God a thing to be grasped. Risebrook, the sons of God, though one with God, must eternally remain other than him, a union in which the primal distinction between creator and created is never overpassed. Transfiguration is a life process, a new and living way of plucking out by the roots every barrier that impedes the miracle. There is a place as well as a state for the silent center. Spiritual reality creates its own vehicle for the transformation of human consciousness. Jesus defined it as an interior well of water springing up within man unto eternal life. Brother Lawrence made practical application of this and opened his heart center as an oratory wherein to retire from time to time, with the soul insensible to everything but divine love. By continued practice, fixed firm in this center, he found a mighty fount of power capable of generating high spiritual radioactivity, exalting the mind to spiritual sight. No longer I believe, I see. Many do not advance because they stick in penance and particular exercise, while they neglect the love of God, which is the end. Jesus, link all effort to an inexhaustible living fount within the being, and enter into relationship with a loving Father. The hardest lesson in the new education is to know God as love. Reasoning from the human standpoint, any law may be violated for love. Hence, any request made to this being called love should be automatically granted. Divine love must be something higher than this that would make chaos of the universe palpitating with the cross purpose of subhuman desires. Man is set in a universe with all its secrets spelled out in the cryptogram called law, and the textbook of this universe is written large as cause and effect, so that he who runs may read. Whatsoever a man soweth, that also shall he reap. Thus is man guaranteed in his sowing. How difficult to denude the mind of false teaching with its haunting pictures of an inexorable judge, who, to placate his offended dignity, demands the death of his well-beloved son, and that forever after, that son is pleading with this offended deity to grant forgiveness to his race. It is not strange that the thinking mind of today refuses such a presentation of the Great Spirit. Jesus taught nothing of the kind. All this has been foisted upon the people by the ignorance and authority of man. Fear of me is a commandment of man which hath been taught them. Paul believed that the Spirit of God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself, not himself unto the world. Accepting Jesus as the interpreter of God, we must get to know him as love. Jesus said man must get into the mental attitude of the little child toward expected good. So loving and personal is this love as to note even the fall of a sparrow, this vagabond among birds, so particular in its care of man that even the hairs of his head are numbered. Hyperbole perhaps, but it serves to indicate his idea of the omnipresent love of God, and as a father he knoweth our need of things. And by his system of intercommunication the restoring power of God can be brought to bear upon all life circumstance. Man has lost connection with his divine munificence. He must reopen the channel through his mental field and get into the attitude of love toward the superlife upon the name of quick helper, a friend of man, loving Father. This dynamic state of mind, Jesus assures us, will open ways and means for fulfillment of man's needs when man cooperates in thought, will, and effort. Comply with that state. Break up and dissolve unbelieving, unproductive states of mind, and exalt mental action to the point of uncovering hidden resources. Cooperation has been clearly stated by the teacher of spiritual law. When you pray, believe that you have received and you shall have. Man has got something to do in this creative miracle, and while he is asking God to change his world, his human machinery must be adjusted and set to reproduce the mental fabric exactly as a loom is set to weave a pattern. Man is the breath of God working through a marvelous contrivance called the human body, designed to reproduce with fidelity a correspondence, point for point with the original figure held in the mental focus. Rhythm is the secret of superphysical transfer. When man is in tune with the infinite, the transfer of supernormal powers follows as the inevitable result of the eternal forward movement of original impulse flowing into open channels at its own level. The supreme office of the human machinery is to transfuse and amalgamate physical, mental, and spiritual elements for the projection of something that is subjective into objective manifestation. He will do exceedingly abundantly more than you ask or think according to the power that worketh in you. The human machinery must be dedicated to whatever work we ask of God, whether it be of business, love, or character. One must get into the rhythm that symbolizes the idea desired. To demonstrate, one must think and act and live as if already in possession of the desired state, for thinking it is creating it. There can be no divided existence of being one thing and having its opposite. The whole being must be in unison with the creative miracle, for the power and responsiveness of spiritual substance is profoundly affected by the nature of the instrument through which it manifests. When man sends his prayer into the infinite, he must, at the same time, trace his desire throughout his mental field, seeing mentally the conditions as they ought to be, vivid, complete, finished, and he must stay in that state of realization for a definite period daily. Thus is created the mental and spiritual foundations, and defined with steadfast fixity the character of the work to be accomplished. To doubt or waver loosens all connections and renders manifestation impossible. Risebrook. One must have an eternal loving and striving, a love that is not a sentimental feeling, but rather a holy energy. Thus, in contemplating God, the essence of all it is, we introduce a perfect cause to work its work in us. Man may turn inward with ease and freedom without hindrance from sensible image as often as he wills to think upon his God. From this unity springs devotion and gratitude for well-being. Thus God enters the heart by means of his gifts. No argument is needed when one has even for one moment passed into the finer forces. The marvelous sense of liberation and harmony is sufficient incentive to enter deeper into the experience that seems to melt the entire being into heavenly beatitude. Love of God is not in words but in power, and the spiritual satisfaction defined as love of God induces a state of mental and spiritual activity that easily carries the whole being forward. Intellectual understanding will not exalt the mind till it enter the heavenly peace, nor any power of will, nor any law vested in personal power. Nothing less than this sublime, longing, yearning love. When this love drenches the soul, there is no more need of coaxing by means of symbols. When once there is established the habit of pressing into God as quick helper, the whole mind rooted there for all resources whatsoever, a dynamic state of mind in one pointed mental pressure, unites with a high potential to give substance to creative thought, contemplating its circuit at the creative base with answering response. One says it is the work of God without knowing how or why. Another knows that it is the work of God because he knows the how and why, for by his working hypothesis there is nothing else. Man is the circulatory system of the one supreme intelligence. The whole body mechanism is a unit for the interpretation of mental action. Consider the act of blushing. An idea flashes fire and burns red hot throughout the body through mental agencies alone. The brain dynamo articulates an idea into living cells, which in turn send out a living vibratory force through nerve wires connecting like currents of force on its own level. From one plane to another, an idea is transformed into its exact correspondence as the inevitable links in the miracle of final manifestation. Man has efficient machinery in its own mind and body to change his life and affairs. It only requires the will to do it. Build on resolve and not upon regret, the structure of thy future. Do not grope among the shadow of old sins, but let thine own soul's light shine on the path of hope, and dissipate the darkness. Waste no tears upon the blotted record of lost years, but turn the leaf and smile, O smile to thee, the fair white pages that remain to thee. Ella Wheeler Wilcox. The great truth to realize is this: union with life-giving spirit is the result of love, not repeating formula, not trying to force law, not coercing other people, not deceived with subconscious phenomena, not temporizing with shrewd intellectualism, but a deliberate pouring forth of the whole being to imbibe and absorb divine life and wisdom. The vocabulary of the divine adventure is love, with man in affectionate relationship with the Great Spirit and its life-giving response. This life interchange transcends the meaning of the word love, as understood by man in his various ephemeral personal moods. Brother Lawrence, having subjected himself to exercises, penance, fasting, and prayer, tells in his little book, The Practice of the Presence, how he developed his own method. He speaks of it as the best and easiest method I know, and I advise the whole world to it. After years of trouble and disquiet, he laid aside particular forms of devotion, giving himself wholly to the practice of this method, and that, somehow, I found myself changed all at once, and my soul, which till that time was in trouble, felt a profound inward peace, as if it had found its center and place of rest. I feel my whole spirit and my whole soul lift itself without trouble or effort of mine, and it remains, as it were, in elevation, suspended in God. Suspended in God, that is the experience of transcendence in the silence. All that precedes this is of the outer mind and may be classified under concentration. How to achieve transcendence? Brother Lawrence repeatedly says, enter into yourself. You need be no longer in search for something without. For of your heart you can make an oratory wherein to hold loving converse with God. In the beginning of his religious life he tried to put out the thoughts he did not want, and by his method he found he was occupied with his sense world all the time. He realized he was using a negative method, but when he began to think of the things he wanted, he ceased spending his energy putting things out. He simply put one idea in, and as the word God connoted the sum total of all life's needs in wisdom and supply, he fastened his whole mind on this one word, God. It acted like a sword of the Spirit. It cut him loose from everything undesirable. In the beginning, he spent the time appointed for private prayer to feed his mind on high notions of God, to convince his mind of, and to impress deeply upon his heart, the divine existence, rather than by devout sentiments, than by studied reasoning and elaborate meditation. Later, as he developed command over his wavering mind, he filled every moment with a sense of the divine presence. His view of prayer was nothing else but a sense of the presence of God, his soul being at that time insensible to everything but divine love. With this practice at last, we should gain a habit which would naturally produce its act in us. His first step towards spiritual freedom was to live as though there was no one but God and him in the world. This resolve loosened the stranglehold of personality upon him. Thus he gave the best that was in him of thought and service to all, for to be true to the higher self. It follows, as the night to day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Part of his appointed work in the brotherhood was preparing food and washing dishes, for which he had a great aversion. So he began the union of mind of man with the mind of God, right in this hated occupation. It became his effectual reminder to practice the presence of God by directing all his work to him. The thing that he thought he could not endure became the opportunity for incessant practice, and like the pearl oyster he developed by means of this hateful irritant, the priceless jewel within his soul, that has for 300 years lighted man's spiritual pathway. Spiritual consciousness is a matter of growth. It is not attained haphazard any more than mathematics is learned by guessing at it. Brother Lawrence accepted the idea of a kingdom of heaven as being within him, as a living truth. He resolved to focus his attention in his heart, and to make of it a sanctuary wherein to draw all his faculties to a center, and to open his mind to the divine presence by assuming the mental attitude that he was in it. Naturally, he experienced many failures, but without being discouraged, he set his mind right again, and continued his exercise, until he arrived at a state wherein it would be as difficult not to think of God as it was at first to accustom himself to it. He had a roving mind, but he brought it into captivity by the will, until finally, in the midst of the most distracting or exacting occupations, he learned to accord action with contemplation, and with several people calling for different things at the same time, he possessed a great tranquility, as if he were on his knees in prayer. He says we must always labor for it in spiritual matters, not to advance it to go back, but those whose soul is stirred by the Spirit go forward even in sleep. To arrive at this state, the beginning is difficult, for we must act purely in faith. He frankly admits that he found great advantages by it. It abolishes pain. I have had enough experience to abolish all doubt that a soul at this stage can feel pain. It confers peace. I am in a calm so great that I fear not. My soul feels a profound inward peace. It fills my life with continual happiness. It affords prosperity. I receive ready succor upon all occasions, supplying me with food, clothing, and the key to treasures. It endowed him with wisdom in his business transactions. We must know before we can love. In order to know God, we must often think of him, and when we come to love him, we also think of him often, for our heart will be where our treasure. Ponder this well. Brother Lawrence regarded God as his supply, and himself served of God at his table. His house enclosed direct reminders of the divine giver. Man needs to put spiritual foundations under his brick-and-mortar house, and to regard himself as the guest of God rather than a reluctant taxpayer. Brother Lawrence grew to realize a profound living companionship which quickened and spiritualized his whole personality. He did not use many words in prayer. Rather did he hold himself in the mental attitude described by Tagore. Day after day, O Lord of all worlds, shall I stand before thee face to face. Words signify living things. This inner oratory is a living thing, and the whole personal self enters this oratory on its knees. Then follows the experience of transcendence when the soul remains in elevation, suspended in God. The inward way. For the creation waiteth for the revealing of the sons of God. Revealed through the transmutation of the whole human organism is the white heat of spiritual ardor. The inward way has 3 stages of arrival with infinite variety and degrees of attainment within these stages. 1. Purgation, the primary break with the sense consciousness. 2. Contemplation or meditation, the recognition and development of spiritual consciousness. 3. Illumination, the union with divine mind. The silence provides the conditions for conscious union. The inward way is the process of being born again and implies new perceptions, functions, and characteristics wrought out through normal practical methods for self-transcendence here and now. I am the resurrection, not was nor will be, but exhibiting the miracle in his present life, teaching that the resurrection is a living experience. Jesus dedicated for us a new and living way. Paul illustrated the experience as, I die daily, die to evil. The resurrection has been misinterpreted by painters with minds full of pictures as a man suspended between heaven and earth, a purely physical thing instead of the supremacy of spiritual man over animal instinct through the law of inward growth. Dionysus, be wary in this work that thou take no example at the bodily ascension of Christ, to strain thy imagination as thou would climb over the moon. Heaven is as nigh down as up, and up as down, behind as before, on one side as another. For so whoso hath truth desires to be at heaven, the same time he were in heaven spiritually. For the high and the next way is run by desires as not by pace of feet. Man is surrounded by atmospheres perfectly attuned to the rhythm of his human state. His up and down is measured in terms of spiritual perception and moral quality fitted exactly to his mental development. Classical tradition has preserved the heroic process of soul pruning for the aspirant for spiritual consciousness. It taught that the barriers that cloud spiritual perception are false human tendencies covering the soul with 7 dense veils which must be burned away by divine fire within. These barriers are self-righteousness, avarice, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, inertia. The seeker after the pearl of great price entered upon methods calculated to kill or cure. He submerged himself in their opposites and sought purification in the acid test of self-abasement, poverty, bodily torture, penance, fasting, and service. Paul's method is the direct method of first intention. His instruction was, keep the thoughts active on whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, and of good heart, and to resist the backward pull unto blood. The psychological law of the association and inhibition of ideas supports this view. Scientific research and mental action has added nothing to this perfect method, except a mass of evidence to corroborate it. By the simple method of preference of ideas, thought nourishment is denied adverse ideas which fall away, leaving the mirror of the mind held as a lens in the focus of the preferred idea. Paul added also an illustration which the most advanced thought of the day is refurbishing. He said, regard the body as a mirror, capable of reflecting states of mind, and by holding certain ideas in the mind, to the exclusion of everything else, man is transformed into a corresponding state. He furnished a brief for denuding the mind of false thought, a method which would at the same time achieve super tendencies. His words are, "Faith is the victory that overcomes the outer world. To that faith supply virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control patience, to patience godliness, patiently seeking to conform to the measure of the stature of spiritual life. He that lacketh these things is blind, having forgotten the cleansing from his old sin." There is no intimation here that deity would perform this miracle independent of man's effort. Dionysius, about AD 500, reduced the growing complexity of spiritual systems to extreme simplicity, and his teaching were quoted for 800 years as "Dionysius saith thus," and so he called his method the cloud of unknowing. Let nothing live in thy working mind but a naked intent stretching to God. Look now forwards, and let be backwards. At first thou findest but a darkness, as it were a cloud of darkness of unknowing betwixt thee and God. When I say darkness, I mean a lack of knowledge. It is not a cloud in the air, but a cloud of unknowing. Thou shalt come to this cloud, and dwell and work therein above thee, and put a cloud of forgetting beneath thee, twixt thee, and all creatures that ever be made. I take out not one creature, whether they be bodily or spiritual, for thou art further from God by whatever rests in the mind. For that thing is above thee, for the time in betwixt thee and thy God. Leave all outward working of the wits. Have the naked intent, folded in one word, God. And with this word beat on the cloud in the darkness above thee, and smite down all manner of thought under the cloud of forgetting with one word out. If any thought presses upon thee to ask thee what thou wouldst have, answer him with no more words but this one word, God, whole and unbroken. If it fordone special deeds press betwixt thee and thy God, step above them and tread them down under thy feet, and try to cover them with a thick cloud of forgetting, as thy had never been done in his life. And as oft thy rise oft put them down with this one word, God. The fewer words the better, and best when it is pure spirit without any pronouncing of word. Judge thyself as thou list, but let other men alone. Set thee sharply to this work, have no reserves, hold no measure, never cease while thou livest. Let it abide in thee either in work or in will. Previous work must be done to strengthen right resolve and repent of past folly. For this is one form of humility, but there is another, as high above this as Christ is above all other men, a perfect cause to work its work in us. God in contemplation, and we no longer being under the feeling of wretchedness, but under a perfect cause for spiritual uplift. Whatever the sins, hang up your love in this cloud of unknowing, and tread down every hateful thing done or undone. Let thy special beholding be more to the worthiness of God, which is perfect, than thine own wretchedness, which is imperfect. Then thou hast God, in whom is all plenty. A perfect worker shall be made so virtuous and charitable that his will shall be purified. Do on then fast. It may be hard and straight in the beginning, when thou hast no devotion, but sometimes he shall send out a beam of spiritual light, piercing this cloud that is betwixt thee and him. During the whole of life that soul should see and feel this cloud between him and God. Time, place, and body should be forgotten in spiritual working. The inward way, which seems at present a dark, the inner man calleth it all, the outer man calleth it naught. Leave thy bodily wits and work fast in this knot. Fasten thyself to God with a leash of longing. The things of taste, sight, feeling, and hearing are all the outer senses. Work not with these. Some there be that without much and long spiritual exercise may not come to the perfection of this work, and some there be so subtle in spirit and so homely with God in this grace of contemplation that they may have it when they will, and yet have full deliberation of all their wits, bodily and spiritual. It is marvelous to number the stirrings that may be in 1 hour wrought in a soul that is disposed to this work. Do on then, I pray thee, fast. For there was never pure creature in this life, nor never yet shall be so high ravished in contemplation, that there is not evermore a high and wonderful cloud of unknowing betwixt him and his God. Therefore swink and sweat in all that thou canst and mayest, for to get thee a true knowledge, and a feeling of thyself as thou art, and then I trow that soon after that thou shalt have a true knowing and a feeling of God as he is. Well may we say with St. Martin, can all this be needed to find God? Aye, is it so feeble an attainment that it can be achieved without discipline or effort? All systems, all methods are of value only as they serve the one great purpose. They capture of automatic, random, unproductive thought. Different methods of appeal to different temperaments. And there are some who require all and every possible means to arouse the body consciousness. Hence the value of penance, hair shirts, all-night vigils and prayers on stone floors, fasting, seclusion, cloisters, symbols, strenuous exercise, and submitting oneself to unremitting selfless service. Not in mere passive negative renunciation, but as a chosen scaffolding to support new modes of thought. Thus it is left to each to make choice of effectual means to achieve the miracle of transfiguration. Eckhart. But if it take not place in me, what avails it? Everything lies in this, that it should take place in me. The silence center. There are two centers to be used in meditation, the heart and the brain, both positive voluntary centers. The involuntary subconscious centers are already overcharged with subhuman tendencies, called by Rhode, the subsoil of human nature, where we are below instead of above the levels of normal consciousness. The chief business of the awakened mind is to move out and clean up these centers of sensual animal instinct. Standing in the place of power and dominion in the heart or brain center, hold the emotional nature receptive to spiritual renewal invoked from the highest levels, thus informing, re-educating, and regenerating the lower levels of consciousness. Science. British Medical Journal. The brain is an organ designed to transform latent energy into active energy. The brain is a mechanical calculator, a mental and physical gramophone capable of holding imprisoned within it the vibratory correspondence of every idea presented to it. Its governor is the will. By means of the brain, the involuntary subconscious centers are brought under conscious control, and the forces that have been involuntarily trapped and energized in instinctive centers are made to feed higher centers of activity and intelligence. Standing in the high watchtower of the human habitation, the ego is able to assemble all subconscious activities under the control of the will, decree obedience over vagrant and fugitive impulses, and set up relationships with original life and power. Right standards and moral qualities transfigure the gray recording mass into an intricate system of highly developed electricity cells, with correspondence in the heart center and with intercommunication throughout consciousness. In the secret laboratory of the heart is blended the voluntary and involuntary impulses. The heart is the animating center of the involuntary sympathetic system, but threaded through with the striped muscle, called in scientific term striated muscle, indicating that it is under the control of the will muscle or voluntary system. Victims of heart disease may take notice that they are not at the mercy of runaway heart, but the reins of the heart are in their own hands. The blood is fluid life, an unstable, formless medium exactly fitted to receive the faintest emotional vibration, holding all experience in suspension in it, and traversing the entire body twice in a minute. It communicates corresponding emotion to every cell. Silence in the heart unifies the whole being. It is the transmuting center by means by which intuition is received into the mind, and it is the animating center of the astral or emotional body. When self-control and spiritual rhythm obtains in the center, the high perception awakes. The heart center is the center for regeneration. This the dark incubating chamber where the synthesis of emotion and will is consummated. This the altar where consuming fires transmute disease and poverty into life and munificence. This the transition center from life to life. The ego conserves the results of experience by means of the heart in which is held in suspension all reactions, all faculty. All the elements extracted from experience are registered here, and by its dynamic power the suspended life is carried across the threshold of the next life. Long after the body is pronounced dead, long after the brain has refused to work, the heart continues action where consciousness is being withdrawn from the body. Bohème. Steadfastly fix thy inner eye upon one point, and by faith press it into this inmost cell within thee. This was called by mystics the cell of knowledge. Spiritual certitude of divine contact is not in the body but in the highest regions of consciousness, which admit of no bodily sensation. In meditation, lose the sense of the heart as a physical organ, and regard it as an inner sanctuary, the meeting place of the soul and the Great Spirit, and by an act of living faith perceive the inpouring life of light and immerse the whole being into this radiance. Imbibe it, absorb it, melt into it. Feel its cleansing fires consuming all dross, all unreality. Mentally impress and appropriate this cleansing idea as a real experience. Having the eyes of your heart enlightened, the Father may give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation. The brain center. The brain center can be aroused and its power quickened by scientific meditation. The act of concentrating upon any point draws blood to that area. Arouse and intensify activity there. The brain is the chief dynamo of the human mechanism. It needs to be recharged consciously from the original powerhouse. The inertia and stagnation that creeps over the brain is caused by lack of adequate stimuli of real purposeful thinking. It uses as a mere automatic repeater, does not force new combinations and readjustments through mental action, thereby augmenting reflexes for vigorous reasoning and capable judgment. Lack of creative thought consigns the brain to syncope. The hands are the external instruments of a brain, and unless some expression is given to them in response to individual creative thought, the whole bodily mechanism becomes an automatic machine. Indolence leads to impairment of the thinking machinery, and the result is atrophy, degeneration, and old age. To strengthen the brain, use the instruction given for the heart center. Begin with repose, inward breath, open heart center, invoke the undivided flow of inner life, center in the God positives. Then softly, without effort or movement, mentally open the brain center, approximating in the center of the head. Fix the inner eye upon the life force inpouring and flowing forth through this center. Take the inward breath from the brain center, mentally expanding skull and skin to receive it. Thinking is an organic process, and its organs need refreshment and new life. Feed it by using the full octave of God positives. Feel the spirit of the word itself thrilling the brain. Will to follow the thought with feeling and realization that it is being done, with the mind always lifting and expanding. Meditation in the brain center. Living Father, I recognize that my life is one with thy infinite life and wisdom, and I open all the avenues of my being to receive thy presence. The infinite intelligence illumines and directs me. I live and move and have my being in God. There is only one intelligence active in my affairs, God, leading me in ways of truth and wisdom. God alone governs me, no other presence, no other power. The infinite life fills and strengthens me. I open all the doors of my life to thee. I fix in my mind the word of health, wisdom, prosperity, and I let the action of God take place. There is only God and his manifestation. Wholeness, harmony, joy, peace, sufficiency, prosperity, all else is unreality. I do now lift my thought into the free and liberating currents of expanding life. I sail the sea of God, and all is well. The giant cells of the brain during waking hours are interlocked, forming a zone of communication. But in sleep the nerve tendrils disconnect, withdrawing themselves, breaking this belt of intercommunication, rendering the machinery unresponsive to external stimuli, while being restored from within. Religion. He giveth to his beloved in sleep. Believe it, and charge the mind I'm going to sleep with higher purpose, and if working out problems, charge it to find the way of solution. The subconscious mind never sleeps. It may be made a valuable helper. It is you who must fix any idea that you desire the subconscious mind to work upon, and you may be sure that it will give the desired help in your hour of need. The silence of the heart. Dionysus. In this work a perfect worker may not suffer the memory of the holiest creature that God ever made to commune with him. He that seeketh God perfectly will not rest him finally in the remembrance of any angel or saint that is in heaven. Arrest the first thought, cease never in thine intent. Take hold of the consciousness and thrust it forward with naked intent, stretching into God. Risebrook. In divine union there is no intermediary between the soul and God. One is lifted up above reason into a bare and imageless vision. The understanding and will is transformed, drenched and established in an abysmal, imageless void of beatific knowing. This kind of creative work requires a suitable enclosure. It is an act requiring seclusion and silence because interruption and movement keeps consciousness on the surface. The beginning is all important, for the steps leading to the silence open invisible doors, and at any moment the mind may pass into the deeper level. Preparation takes valuable time. Haste and impatience hold the mental field like an impassable wall. Spiritual quickening is the result of a right beginning. Therefore, the need of providing suitable conditions for this practice. A quiet room, door locked secure against the accident of interruption, a time set apart disguised under any name to meet the curiosity of inquirers. Interior rhythm precedes all manifestation. Therefore, breath and position are powerful aids in unifying vibrations of the mind and body. Place the body in a position of physical comfort. A sense of discomfort will keep the mind on the surface. Let cushions support head and arms, thus at the very beginning suggesting rest and refreshment. Avoid a rigid position. Do not rest on the spine. Let the upper part of the body feel free. Dispose the less than any help to be used in order on a table so near as to require the minimum of external effort. Let the feet touch loosely but not crossed. The hands so loosely clasped that a spider's web could be drawn through without breaking. With the left thumb resting in the right palm, right thumb free resting on outside of the left thumb, the body is now a closed circuit, open only from within. Begin rhythmic breathing, which is merely an easy in and out breathing without effort, never tense, never holding. Gradually deepen this to the inward breath. Thus, close the eyes, open the inner eye, perceive toward the heart. See it as a fount of living spirit. Engage its activity by keeping the inner eye fixed upon it and drawing it out into the heart center. Easily, serenely, and exhale it inwardly all through the body. As you inhale, expand inwardly without movement of the body. Expand head, brain, still imperceptible, neck, arms, chest, lower limbs, and exhale inwardly through the feet. Sink consciously, steadily toward the center of the being. Softly, gently introduce a thought. As you inhale, realize that the very life of God is now active in you. Feel its calm. As you exhale, send new life to every cell with a thought. I am filled with divine life. Regard the heart center as the center of the chest with the breastbone as the diameter. The inward breath becomes imperceptible in the silence. The student must take time to practice it, for it is the only breath used in meditation in the silence. The alternate breath is useful at times to restore nervous states, and if used in the period of meditation, should precede the inward breath. The latter is mental, and it is important to waste as little time as possible in external exercise. The whole purpose is to breathe inward, think inward, expand inward, and move the whole consciousness inward. The silence is devoid of physical action. The experience is in the mental field with physical action in abeyance, mental and spiritual activity at their highest. It may assist the mind to work with the symbol of a circle. Draw a circle of any size, and within its center draw another teeny circle. Let the outer circle represent the circumference of your aura, and the inner circle represent the central fount of supply, which is taken hold of by the inner breath and directed throughout the body. Let that inner circle represent your heart center. Feel its outpouring life restoring you. Expand inwardly to receive it. Perceive this inner breath as the spirit of life pulsing from the heart of God. Take hold of it mentally as you inhale, drawing it from the margins of the unmanifest out into the human body, slowly, easily, softly. All laborious contortions are unnecessary and inimical to meditation. Gymnastics have their place in physical development, but not here. Rhythm is the first and last word in breathing, softly, but with no perceptible physical movement. Expand inwardly like a balloon, and as softly turn the breath downward, exhaling. Relax constantly. Drop shoulders and elbows. Let the hands and feet feel heavy. This relieves tenseness. Feel the back relaxed and soft. Let the face expand from within, becoming soft, the lips merely touching, no contraction anywhere. The heart center is the center for spiritual development. With the body in position, take conscious direction of the vibrations by the inward breath. With a growing sense of expansion, open the whole being to the undivided flow of inner life. Let the one life, one intelligence, one substance fill arteries and veins. Paul, hold the pattern of sound words in faith and love. Wash the body with a word. One of the most powerful words to readjust discordant conditions is harmony. Inhale and exhale with it. Let its rhythm unify your discord. In like manner, take hold of God through the God positives. Regard yourself no longer as a mere object of flesh and bone, but a spiritual center of high radioactivity, an enclosure of God power immersed in a spiritual essence. Stately music is a powerful agent in the readjustment of consciousness. Its subtle influence involuntarily captures the subconscious mind. Orchestral music may be used as a means for meditation rather than for an orgy of emotion spending itself to no purpose. Exercise, fresh air and bath, high thinking and simple living are means to keep the body elastic and responsive to high degrees of consciousness, and by daily application to secure it against the disease of inertia. Temperance in all things. Go not beyond the beam of the balance. Pythagoras. Transcendence. Concentration brought to the point of passing into meditation marks the union of opposites. Concentration implies effort. Meditation is effortless. Concentration captures every faculty, narrowing consciousness to a point wherein is set a God positive, and as the focus becomes stabilized, expansion of consciousness ensues, called by the old mystics infused contemplation, meaning that the human being was being imbued with the contemplated idea. As meditation deepens, all thought transformation ceases and pure perception is reached in terms of the ideas meditated upon. Expansion of consciousness includes the body, for it is for the very purpose of uplifting the body consciousness that transcendence is entered upon. The whole being is carried forward, the process is movement. Wisdom is more moving than any motion. This marvelous experience of expansion exalts the body consciousness out of its automatism, and while its activities are held in abeyance, it is drenched with spiritual energy. Never lose the point in meditation. Enter the method with a calm interior slight sensitive to degrees of uplift, moving forward and upward with intention, serene, motionless, and when, having slipped into the thrilling state of the silence, stay in the state of knowing, keen to perceiving the effect throughout the being, noting that the body-mind has transcended its lower levels and has merged in the one unifying spiritual center, its narrow confines transcended. Even the hands and feet cannot be located in mind with definition. To be able to observe one state without precipitating consciousness on the surface requires some experience in transcendence. One should have such calm self-control that the return movement into self-consciousness shall be intentional and deliberate, analyzing every shade of transition, thus impressing the mind with the way of ascent, rendering each future attempt easier until meditation shall no longer wait upon means, but remembrance of past homecoming shall whisper its eternal melody in the heart, carrying one forward even in sleep. Mere emptiness and tendency to sleep is utter inertia, and to abide in that nothingness is to denigrate into subjective bodily sensation. Expansion is to the mind what sparking is to the motor. It signifies power and movement. Without this living fire there is no quickening, and the work remains in the lower levels of thought as a form of words. Sparking does not take place in an engine until the intake of air and spirit is combined in exact measure and under control. Neither can expansion occur without a corresponding intake and a control mechanism. In expansion, the outer mind is submerged in high degrees of intelligence. The experience is physical as well as mental and spiritual, thus testifying in terms understood by the common consciousness and devoid of all images. The soul has its altar. In this heart center is a holy of holies within man where divine unction certifies itself. In Acts 28:24-28 and Acts 29:1-4, we read of the eloquent Alexandrian Apollonius, who had been instructing students in Ephesus, and to whom Paul put the question, "Did ye receive the Holy Spirit when ye believed?" They answered, "Nay, we did not so much as hear that there is a Holy Spirit." This word has been considered as belonging to an obsolete vocabulary having no relationship with experience. Ye are the temples of God, and the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. When there is fusion of mind of man with mind of God, there is an expansion of the Spirit, or breath of God, within ourselves, that sweeps us with a mighty flood of power above thought and words, unifying body, mind, and soul with its own essential nature, and sensed by us as a marvelous rhythm, expansion, lucidity. This expansion is the first step in transcendence. Thus man becomes a center and a channel for the creative action of spirit, and its activity certifies itself in this sign, whereby man may know that he has become an efficient instrument for the readjusting, harmonizing, restoring energy called the Holy Spirit. Those who say that suggestion is the only means used speak only from that level where suggestion is used in speaking the truth of life into the consciousness. It is the outer contact of mind with mind. From this point, the healer moves steadily from statement to statement, both audible and silent, until both see eye to eye, perceiving that in God man lives and moves and has his being. At this point, argument and suggestion have gone as far as human effort can go. Then, with the whole consciousness saturated with reality, from the living ground, something spontaneous and seemingly unconnected with any human stress and strain swells through the being like swift fire, communicating itself to the patient as supernal calm, warmth and rhythm, blotting out pain and lifting mind and body out of discomfort into harmony. This is the activity of the Holy Spirit. It is man's work to prepare the way. In most languages, spirit and breath are synonymous terms to signify the principle of life conceived as a fragment of the divine essence breathed into man by God. This self-certifying presence of the Holy Spirit is a necessary co-commitment of true healing. Without it, one is left in the common vocabulary of suggestion and personal magnetism, unrelated to wisdom and spirituality. To attain to this level and to be ready for this miracle to take place through the human channel whenever called upon demands persistent practice. Without this confirmation within, there is no justification for the use of the term spiritual healing, because the effort is wholly on the lower levels of mental action, and being devoid of this answer and response of spiritual fire, suspending both the patient and the healer is superphysical forces, gives no honorable evidence to either of spiritual quickening. Method: advance step by step into the inner sanctuary from mental argument, handling false beliefs, fixing ideas of truth in the mental field, narrowing to abstract ideas, identifying with God positives, passing the word to the spirit of the word, expanding, ascending by aspiration, prayer, realization, to the most high place unifying with the one life, moving forward until met and suspended in the Spirit of God. Realization. Realization is the ripening process in mental creation. It gives vividness and definition to a mental concept. It is perception throughout consciousness of the thing or state desired, with all the emotions attending that state as a finished act, calling the things that are not as though they were. Realization is possible only when there is clear understanding of spiritual principle and unvarying law, and a method adequate to engage it. The initial impulses rise in man. Realization leads to perpetual growth, increased expansion, and illumination. Meditate constantly upon divine life and intelligence, its presence in man, his human machinery, its instrument. Mentally receive it and realize that the action of God is taking place in you to overcome all discord, sickness, and evil, and compel effort in line with this idea. Passive assent or mere mental belief is inefficient to condense the cosmic currents into living conditions. Prayer. The supplication of a righteous man availeth much in its working. St. James. We are thus told that there is a scientific law involved in this process called prayer. It works. Effectual prayer is a process of releasing by means of the human instrument certain elements necessary to bring about the answer. Man has not learned how to stay with his prayer according to the instruction. When ye pray, believe that ye have received, and ye shall have. He has unbelieved his request from the moment he sent it into space and doubting its possibility instead of believing it to fruition. He has not complied with the law of mental creation. Effectual prayer means working with ardor. Devotion is a degree of mental pressure that enables consciousness to move out of the conflict of cross-purpose into a center of calm, the living ground for the operation of spiritual forces. It matters not how the personal mind is persuaded to look beyond its limited self, whether by scientific analysis or religious faith. Experience will finally lead to thinking man to his needs and gratitude for well-being from a source higher than his personal mind. The Great Source endows mankind with beneficent forces, fire, electricity, steam, and lastly mental energy, all given to man under the same condition, namely, that he get to know their laws and bring them under his control. Thus, prayer is another process of engaging miracle-moving energy. No one who seeks transcendence can object to either devotion or prayer. Both lift the mind above the lower self. Whoso desires supreme gifts beyond the ken of the common mind must conform to the laws of spiritual bestowal. Devotion works through exalted thought and defines the quality of thought necessary. All the way to the calm state of realization in God, pray with intense desire for wisdom, strength, health, help, knowing that God does not withhold it, but that the human mind requires His firm reach into an overflowing fount to confirm its weak faith and to anchor the mind as something higher than itself. When the mind is stayed upon God, continue in prayer, realizing that in the life of God is contained every element of which you have need, and that you are now being quickened, animated, and formed by it. Realize that the Spirit works, is now working in you according to your thought. Meditate. There is but one life, one intelligence. I am in that life. All anxious thought dissolves in the presence of divine love. Infinite intelligence overrules my affairs. All discord is healed with harmony. All fear melts away in the presence of confidence in the divine presence. There is one body, one Spirit, one God and Father of all, who is above all, through all, and in all. And I am in that life. It inspires and directs me, surrounds and supports me, illumines and strengthens me. I think into it, and it reproduces my word. I claim health, wisdom, efficiency through God, who is my life. I believe it into life. I have faith to believe that the very God of very God guards my thought action with the integrity of His own law. Trace with deepening understanding all the known connections, all ways and means connected with your problem. This vitalizes mental action, opens new channels and commands new unseen elements, new adjustments and combinations not yet energized to action. He will do exceedingly abundantly more than you ask or think according to the power that worketh in you. Prayer works, and the initial impulses rises in man to bring his power to pass. The whole question of prayer rests upon man's idea of the nature of God. Slowly but surely man is coming into the recognition of a vastly different God than was worshipped on Mount Sinai. The God of our forefathers had the power to keep His creatures burning forever, and there are still those who accept their disease as sent from God, accusing the Father of lights of being a dispenser of boils and fevers. It takes a mind free from egotism to perceive that the root of disease is ignorance, that somewhere along the path of life law was violated, and to face himself like a man and say, "Of my own ignorance I created this. This disease condition is the result of destructive mental forces generated in wrong thinking. I am responsible for this. I will arise and go to my Father, in whom is all resource for my healing." In ancient times the gods were fed with living sacrifice, and in the hope of securing favor of God of Father had the power to deliver His sons to be burned. But these records do not state that any of these fathers offered themselves to be burned. The fire god, Moloch god, and disease god are going the way of all the world, revealing a God of love and law, of whom the old prophet said, "He that touches you touched the apple of His eye." If God is believed to be a divine presence, an omnipresent, living, loving energy, man can enter into that rhythm and partake of its nature and beneficence. Meditation, with means and without means. Madame Guyon, divine union has its commencement, its progress, its achievement, and its consummation. You cannot get from the entrance to a distant place without passing over the intermediate space. Two things must have some relation or similarity before they can become one. Symbols and diagrams are a means of support to the mind as it advances through unknown and untried ways. These afford connecting links for thought, carrying the mind without a break from particular details to general principles. The subconscious mind cannot accept an absolutely new idea with which it is unrelated, either by experience or by argument. Symbols and diagrams give impulse to mental action, which, proceeding from known facts, easily carry the mind forward into the unknown. Going inward is a progressive movement in consciousness, requiring a scaffolding of incontrovertible logic to capture the whole mind. Diagrams are mental signposts pointing the way and uncovering the process. The beginner has no sense of mental definition. He has no center, no focus, and no circumference. His mental forces are diffused and unstable. To be able to act with definition, holding the whole mind with a firm grasp, use the outline of a circle to define your controlled aura. Draw a circle of various sizes and place it where the eyes will rest upon it often, and carry it about with you for a frequent reminder. Learn to walk in it, to eat in it, to sleep in it, to work in it. Place it over every personal interest, over home and family, and use it in all treatments, all meditations. You will soon perceive how life power has been scattered, drifting on floating currents. Handle the mind with definition. Hold it captive to an idea. Consciously enter upon ownership and operation of vast interior forces preordained for man's benefit. Madame Guyon, meditative reading leads to meditation. Those who read fast reap no benefit. One must absorb the heart of a subject, reading the line, then closing the eyes and assimilating it. Then, by an act of living faith, place yourself in the presence of God, with eager sinking into the inmost center. Never lose the point, but feed upon the truth in highest realization, passing above reasoning about it. How to exalt the mind. Place the most ideal picture of Christ in front of you so that your eyes may easily rest upon it as you read. Arrange on the table before you brief statements or mottos and practice silent contemplation of them. Add to this any and all means to capture the wayward senses. Prayer, incense, or an unfolding rose symbolizing your own unfolding soul. A symbol, whether an object or an idea, provides a mental center to which the mind gradually attaches itself, and as consciousness identifies with the spiritual significance beneath the idea, spiritual perception is aroused in terms of an idea. Creation is the action of the mind in an idea. The mind is not capable of bringing anything to pass except it be accompanied by the emotional counterpart of the idea in living energy. Feeling is the only language understood by the subconscious mind. How to create deep feeling is the secret of demonstration. So long as one depends upon stimuli from without to cause action, one has no power to initiative. Therefore, one must learn how to initiate activity in the inner mind and produce deep feeling, independent of all external stimuli by means of ideas. Thoughts create feeling. Repeated feeling creates function. Function becomes automatic habit. Interior meditation, inward gazing with naked intent, stretching into God, unifies the whole consciousness in one undivided vibratory wave. Daily practice will develop and establish this wave impulse, and consciousness will be lifted permanently to higher levels. As only perfect models are used for copy in the educational world, so only perfect spiritual models should be imagined for spiritual growth. This symbol will give perfect visualization and definition, feed the mind on the highest ideal, deepen feeling and initiate activity in the inner mind, enunciating corresponding electromotive force throughout the organism. Let this symbol transcend its picture limits and impart its strength, beauty, repose, wisdom, harmony, wholeness, well-being, oneness with omnipotence. Practice melting into these divine qualities, keeping the focus steady in a God positive. Expand ever inward, letting the power symbolized by the word radiate through you. Lend your whole being to each idea in turn. Become enraptured with the thought of your soul's perfection. When consciousness is captured, the idea stable, the mind one-pointed, argument has done its work. Rest in that state of knowing, ever ascending in spiritual realization and aspiration. In a moment that you know not, you will have lifted the mind where the transfer of higher forces is inevitable, and you will be carried into the silence, suspended in God. Mental argument. This is the spiritual reality of man. I realize the truth of myself. I am a divine soul having an outer mind. The Father and I are one. Around and within me is infinite life and intelligence. I am its instrument. I think God's thoughts after him, and so I do now come forth in the power of my inner glory and fill my outer life with harmony. Harmony. Glow with the becoming. Close the eyes. Thinking it deeply with heart, mind, and soul. Expand. I keep my mind open constantly to the limitless life within. I will to recognize only God in his manifestations, wisdom, wholeness, harmony. These ideas live in me. By my word I fix these living ideas in my mind, and by the law of God my whole nature is transformed into their image and likeness. There is no separation in mind. Divine mind knows no need and is charged to bring it to pass. I am alive with the idea, and I let the action of God take place. I know only one mind at work, living, active, and quick. The mind reproduces my word. Standing in the presence of God, there is nothing to fear, nothing to strive against, but everything to create, to trust. These are my divine foundations. In letters of living fire, I write these words across my being. These things are mine, through God who is my life. When you feel the spiritual glow waning, center again on the symbol with ardor of mind and soul. Realize that the omnipotent life of God flows unceasingly through you, imbuing you, informing and endowing you. Thus, by persistent expansion and exaltation of consciousness, that part immersed in the physical shell is aroused, energized, and lifted into higher degrees of knowing. Dwell reposefully, lovingly on every word, immerse yourself into it. The human machinery is the circuit of mental impression. Use it to produce definite results. Learn its laws and recreate your world. Enter into living relationship with nature. Its solitudes are vocal with inspiration. Its repose is refreshment. Its leafage silent testimony of inward fire. Enter into a mood of loving absorption with the woods, fields, mountains, sky, limpid pools, the sea. Let the soul feel kin with all life. Retire often to the heart of nature and drink of her fountain of perpetual renewal. In the old saga, Wotan sought a drink from the fountain at the roots of the great tree of life. It was guarded by 3 sibyls who demanded that he surrender one eye in payment. Thereafter Wotan walked one-eyed through the world afire with vision, blind to old allurements. Healing. Thought subjected to the internal fires of the human dynamo becomes powerful electromotive force. Through scientific use of the thinking apparatus, new causes can be set in motion that readjust, restore, and recover the self and affairs. At the meeting of the British Biological Association in 1919, Dr. Waller exhibited a machine for photographing the thoughts and emotions acting upon the electric energy of the nervous system of the body and the brain, and however brief the experience, it is recorded. Having analyzed the nature of the forces generated in the mind, it can be easily seen that readjustment of body and affairs begin when the emotive radioactivity generated in the human dynamo is sufficiently powerful to engage high-velocity ether waves, lifting consciousness out of depression and inertia and connecting with resources hitherto unused. Healing is not the result of peculiar and mysterious magic, but it is the normal result of the action of a high potential of electromotive energy induced by a scientific process. Absent treatment demands the same intensity of realization, the same procedure, the same sense of life communicated as in present treatment. To those who, after having followed thus far in the soul's adventure in reality, ask for hard and fast formula for healing disease and establishing prosperity, let the answer of Jesus answer. Seek the kingdom of heaven and all things will be added. The method of arrival which will suffice to carry consciousness into silence and experience the signs following reveals the kingdom of heaven, and the same method is used for the realization of any condition and will bring into manifestation whatsoever one applies to it. Thinking alone will not bring prosperity unless reinforced by action in line with the idea. Faith without works is dead. Whatsoever problem is to be solved requires daily treatment. Every connection must be mentally traversed so as to vitalize and harmonize every known means, giving impulse to the mind to unknown yet related resources. Human life and effort has got to be wrought into the problem. There is no cheap and easy way to liberate an immortal soul from the human jungle and to lift it up into the finer ethers. Every false claim must be analytically handled and daily treated in order to dissolve and break down the claim, together with affiliated ether waves, and stop its action. No general statement will do this. Each false claim must receive specific treatment peculiar to its own false representation. In this lifting process, level after level of mental ignorance is overtaken, subjugated, and transformed. All meditation, treatments, and proposed demonstrations should be written out and worked through daily, changing as meditation clarifies the mind. Vibration. Rhythm or vibration is the common denominator of ideas. An idea received into the brain dynamo by means of the senses is reduced there to its common denominator, wave impulse, and conveyed to the communicating centers in the human organism in the universal code, vibration, enunciating itself in exact correspondence to the idea. Science. Howell. Modern psychology considers the nerve cell the source of electrical energy for the nervous system. These cells show fatigue and a necessity of sleep for recuperation. Maso. Increased mental activity is accompanied by rise of the temperature of the brain. Howl. Nerve cells discharge electric energy with rhythmic regularity independent of any stimulation. Muscle tone. When a muscle is stimulated directly or through its motor nerve, a musical tone may be heard by applying the ear or a stethoscope to the muscle. The process of conduction in the nerve is a phenomena of an order comparable to the transmission of light or electricity, with the velocity so great as to defy measurement. We have positive evidence that when light falls upon the living retina, an electrical disturbance is produced by the visible rays of the spectrum. We have positive evidence that motor discharges are accompanied by a wave of electrical potential, the axon of the nerve discharge. The dendrite of the nerve receives. A nerve cell sends out two processes, an axon and a dendrite. These constitute a perfect system of communication through the body. Sir Oliver Lodge. We cannot affect the ether mechanically, but we can vibrate it electrically. An electrical charge in sufficiently rapid vibration is the only source of ether waves. Maxwell quoted by Sir Oliver Lodge. The interplanetary regions are full of this wonderful medium. It extends unbroken from star to star, and when a molecule vibrates in the dog star, the ether receives the impulse of these vibrations, and after carrying them in its immense bosom for years, delivers them in due course, regular order, and full tale into the spectroscope of Mr. Huggins at Tulse Hill. In other words, we are immersed in a sea of ether so sensitive that it transmits instantly to the uttermost parts of the universe the slightest vibration imparted to it. Accepting scientific analysis, a nerve cell is a source of electrical energy. All sense impressions are conveyed to the brain cells. Thoughts operate electrical forces which are discharged into the ether. The discharge of a nerve cell is an electrophenomenon. The ether is a vibratory medium transmitting messages in the universal code, vibratory correspondence. Thus is assured communication throughout the universe, mind with mind. The universe is a universal phonograph, recording the thoughts of man in ceaseless flow, connecting with human receivers exactly tuned to receive the message. The universe is a storehouse of energy which can be set in motion by human impulses. The initial impulse rises in man and is carried on etheric waves to its destination. Sir Oliver Lodge. Ordinary matter seems so quiescent, placid and inert, yet to the eye of the physicist it is a scene of well-regulated but intense activity. From these radioactive elements, small projectiles are emitted with a velocity far beyond anything known, except the velocity of light itself. They are shot off with speed which, if there were no obstruction, would carry the particles from London to New York in a twinkling of an eye, and from a speck of radium, millions of such atomic projectiles are shot off every second. There is still a more secret store of energy to be found in the ether. Every cubic millimeter of the ether of space contains an amount of energy equal to the total output of a 1,000,000 horsepower station, working day and night for 30,000 years. The store is omnipresent and absolutely exhaustless. The following are the words verbatim of a lecture by Richard Carr, England, whose experiments were elaborated into a system by W. H. Preece, which has been in practical use by the British War Department. Surprising results may be accomplished in mental telepathy between two persons who are in sympathy and who understand the communication of thought from one person to another. We are familiar with remarkable phenomena that could be explained in no other way except through the communication of one mind to another. To say that they are coincidences would be absurd. Sir Oliver Lodge and Mr. Marconi place a transmitter in one room and a delicate receiver in the other. An electrical energy immediately passes through walls, books, everything, and our ideas of solid bodies receive a rude shock. I can press a button a definite number of times, and an exact response is at once recorded on a ribbon miles away in the complete absence of connecting wires. Every atom in a tree and in a bar of iron can be set into rapid vibration. There are always spaces between atoms. Iron contracts and expands with cold and heat. If there is absolutely nothing solid in nature, it follows that it is possible for a medium possessing certain qualities to permeate all things. We have the strongest reason for believing that such a medium exists. Throughout all solids, liquids, gases, ourselves, and the atmosphere there exists one medium known as ether. The ether is the medium, and electricity is the messenger. The light of the sun is accepted as the same with electricity. The ether is not the air. The air is counted by thousands of waves per second, while ether is by hundreds of millions. Ether conducts light, while air conducts sound. We see lightning before we hear the sound of thunder. The eyes see red at the rate of 400 billion per second and violet at the rate of 700 billions. Ether is the medium, light the agent, and the eye the receiving instrument. Thought, then, is a substantial force in the world like electricity and heat, capable of benefiting or destroying the one who uses it. As man is the machinery of thought, he should know its laws and how to govern it, because his well-being is involved in every impulse that passes through him. Man has thought of conquest as relating only to his external world, unmindful of the sea of forces raging within his inmost self. The activities of radium are so great and mysterious that a mere speck will agitate gold leaf through a dividing wall, and after curing 1,000 malignancies in succession, remains as it was in the beginning without losing power. Experiment proves the individuality of each wave impulse. Radium is so rapid a vibratory rate that it speeds it unimpeded as it penetrates the space of denser atoms and sends its light wave 187,000 miles before it spends itself, simultaneously moving through the same field of space with myriads of other vibratory waves. All things are possible to him that believeth. Believeth what? Believeth that they are possible. Once set the mind straight as to what is to be accomplished, moving forward with persistent effort toward a given end, the force that supports it is the completion across the void is faith. The physical senses are able to respond to a very small number of the motion which makes up the life of the universe. Physical science is becoming superphysical, recognizing as it does the possibility of impressing subjective intelligence through mental actions. Thus, universal law reveals the healing process. When consciousness is aflame with the truth of life as health, harmony, prosperity in tune with original trend, it is upborne with like currents of irresistible power, and anyone who will place his mind in contact with that dynamic center will receive into his own consciousness the vibratory correspondence of living ideas. All the forces of the universe are designed to aid man and to wait his touch to obey him. Jesus did not treat man as a mere reflection, but as a co-worker with God. He said he was about the Father's business, that he came to do the work of him that sent him. His work was to give health and strength to the body and right ideas to the mind. In short, to make a man every whit whole. He never taught that the earth was unworthy of man's care or unfit for God's activities. We are assured that it is the divine purpose to bring order out of chaos through the cooperation of man. My presence shall go with thee. There was nothing of the mechanical impersonal theory in the healing work of Jesus. His method was particular and personal. He appealed distinctly to the personal spirit. His words are, "Stretch forth thy hand, damsel, arise, Lazarus come forth." Jesus did not guarantee that a man would not be ill if he persisted in ill practices. Go and sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon thee. Jesus did not heal all the sick in Palestine. He admits that he could do very little healing in Nazareth because of the unbelief of the people. He required that the one seeking healing should feel his need and reach out for it, and although Judas lived with him for more than 3 years, he went away worse than he came. Jesus taught that the nature of the mental soil, its depth, its quality profoundly affected the growth of mental seeds. Man's inmost motives challenge the forward movement of spiritual energy. Man thinks in living forces, which respond with exact fidelity to the thought seed thrown into it. Harmonious life is the living science conditioned by the power that worketh in you. The whole story of creation is told in these words. The Word made flesh. Nations and races have sunk out of sight, incinerated by the swift fires generated in inflammable human elements, or swept by cyclones of savage instincts and tempestuous passions, each phase of which traverses the atmospheric ethers, devastating as it goes. This generation witnesses the attempt to fathom the depth of mind and spirit. Knowledge of books alone is not sufficient, nor willpower, nor belief, nor effort, but all these together, united in an unbroken bond of union between God and man, will yield new knowledge and powers. Sickness and discord have been accepted as a legitimate part of life and unattached to hidden causes. Man can separate himself from these standard delusions by the aid of the sharp two-edged sword of mental and spiritual surgery. He must establish inseverable relationship with the quickening presence of God as the undivided flow of life and health from within, deleting from the mind all thought of separateness, closing up the gap between God and man. While man lives in a physical body, he is held accountable for an existence of usefulness. If he finds himself handicapped by a slow-moving body, wheezy breathing organs, protuberances inside and out, he will have to cut away, psychic and tonic the mental body as he has been doing to the physical body, to clean out the cause of these appearances. Man needs to become expert in the use of tools that are living and sharp. Mental life is a living thing. Ideas that operate mental life are living tools. Consciousness is alive through and through with defensive weapons for self-protection. Man is held in mental bondage by ancient illusions that put their paralyzing touch upon the vitals to the third and fourth generation. On the physical plane there is a physical infection, and when the body is invaded by infectious bacilli, it manufactures and pours out an antibody to overcome the invading enemy and render it immune from recurring attacks. The mental life is provided with like weapons. Its antibody is corrective thought discharging electric power throughout the organism, neutralizing adverse conditions. Jesus, eat my words and have life in yourself. The new surgery operates mentally. The new spiritual serum is injected mentally. The new electricity is generated from within. Physical resources are paltry compared with this spiritual elixir. The universe is alive, and man, standing in the most high place of mental and spiritual initiative, can reach to its nethermost boundaries and set it athrill by powerful ideas. Spiritual healing prescriptions are powerful tonics. They stimulate dying forces, they stir the embers of real being, they kindle new fires within the mind, delivering man from his only real enemies. The mental attitude is the thing that needs healing. The body has no alternative, for by its nature and the law it is forced to respond. By taking mental remedies, the roots of tumors and cancers are loosened, and the acids of rheumatism dissolved. The remedy is applied to the soil that holds the roots. One of the first things prescribed in physical treatment is a purge. It is also the first thing in mental treatment. The mental purge is called denial. It separates the mind from false belief. It purges the mind from wrong thought, and the action of God takes place. Instead of indirect application of external means to a result, interior means are used in direct healing, demonstrating an indwelling life process readjusting the whole being. Selfish instincts, fits of temper, resentment, habitual deceit, and lust produce mental adhesions. These destructive thoughts will manufacture disease conditions faster than any serum can counteract them. False growth may be cut away, yet the mental cause is not undermined. The roots are still there, and the same destructive cause continue their baneful work. Disease is not the punishment for broken laws, it is the evidence of it. Man is here for one supreme purpose, to grow in knowledge, and growth in knowledge is not a cut-and-dried process that can be handed down like houses and land. Knowledge is undergoing perpetual renewal. The truth as it is in God admits of unceasing revelation to the mind of man, and he should see to it that no merely ancient inherited beliefs rob him of his divine inheritance. Get away from the idea that the body is a fixed and unchangeable thing. It is an ever-changing kaleidoscope register of thought. In treatment, a patient is connected with whatever stream of consciousness is generated by the healer. If that stream rises no higher than the human personality, one may contract pernicious mental infection. If the power invoked rises to the heights of spiritual truth, the whole being feels the power of new wisdom and power. In the most high place where spiritual life imparts itself, there can be no personal thought, no discord. The mind must have attained its freedom to hang on God in fixed realization. To operate in direct spiritual impulses, the mind of the healer must be alive with an understanding faith that is built upon reason and experience, with knowledge of mental and spiritual law, and with the confidence born of self-certifying contact with spiritual energies. Argument to lift the body out of its mental paralysis induced by ceaseless complaining. Speak to it with love and power. Body, I lift you out of condemnation. No longer do I call you sick or weak. I praise you. I tell you the truth of yourself. You are strength. You are health. You are youth, beauty, and symmetry. Every cell in you shall have my deep desire to restore and refresh you. Body, you are made in the image and likeness of God, whole, radiant with life. I keep my eye fixed upon the inner glory, so shall I transform you into the divine likeness. This truth shall set you free. All effort is directed at changing the consciousness, for outer conditions are tethered to inward states. Healing treatment requires teaching, audible and silent. But a higher level must be reached, and if the healer has not yet ascended to that level, how shall he lift another? Words can never do it. The healer must be the living link within the chain. He must take the giant swing into reality, and the forward movement will lift the patient, holding both suspended in spiritual equilibrium and harmony. And where there is harmony, there is healing. The giant swing of the gymnast across space is not his initial swing. His first efforts were upheld by firm footholds, swinging where his feet could touch the solid earth, until finally, feeling the space encircled in his consciousness, he extended his mind to a reach of safety and achieved the giant swing. This is exactly the method of the student working in the invisible. Divine Guidance. Drummond. I ran up the natural law as far as it would go, and the appropriate connection seldom even loomed in sight, till I had reached the very top. Then it burst into view in a single moment. A mind confident of its spiritual resource, observing natural law, faithful to every duty, meeting experience with a resolve to measure up to spiritual law, anticipates the inevitable link in the chain of divine sequence, and is upborne and supported in its providing care. Infinite intelligence has manifold resources at its disposal to lead man to contact this perfect chain of sequence, so that every man need is met. It is forever working to incorporate into its harmony every human life, seeking each and all for unity, completeness, happiness, and reality. When one realizes that the limited personal mind cannot guide in all things, and external resources have been exhausted, there yet awaits a leading through practice of the presence in meditation and the silence, to guide us with unerring instinct, and almost unconsciously we seem to slip into the right place that leads to the fulfillment of life here and now. This means that our mind will become quickened to respond to higher degrees of consciousness and incorporate it as normal faculty. Signs will be given us day by day of the companionship and guidance of God as a real and loving presence, enabling us to readjust our life day by day to events as they appear. For every day requires new adjustments in the light of the emergence of the divine order, revealing its change of sequence, requiring our immediate act in accordance with it, lifting us into fuller realization of our ideals and helping us to make continual readjustment for equilibrium. This implies an arrangement of means to ends so that acts complement each other as hook to eye. Through the continuity of law from the innermost center in us to the circumference of outer relations, divine love finds a way through our cooperation to lead us into spiritual perception, health, efficiency, harmony, and happiness. When we maintain our first principle, divine guidance, secondary matters clear up one by one. And in the pictorial language of daily experience, the lessons to be learned are revealed, and every forward step is illumined by the light of the Spirit. And as we go forward expecting divine guidance, our pressure is upon the very life of God laid down in man as various levels of consciousness to bring our thoughts to pass. Illumination and divine union. St. John of the Cross. The spiritual light wherein the soul is steeped is not of itself so distinctly perceptible or visible. Yet when anything is presented to the mind, or it is called upon to decide between the false and the true, it at once perceives and understands it with infinitely more clearness than before. Risebrook. This incomprehensible light which enwraps and penetrates us as the air is penetrated by the sun is nothing else than a fathomless inward starring in a vast expanse. The soul itself fills that expanse. The one in whom this takes place must be inwardly seen with the eyes of the understanding. As air is penetrated by the brightness and heat of the sun, and iron penetrated by fire, yet each keeps its own nature, so the touch of God quickens with life, enlightens the reason, teaches truth and discernment, and keeps us stable in great strength, yet the creature does not become God. Whenever the soul's highest power are turned inward with active love, they are united with God without means, and with no intermediary between himself and God, but his enlightened reason and his active love. And the bare, uplifted understanding, lifted above images, is drenched through by abysmal love, as iron is by fire, which pierces through every condition and all beings. St. Teresa. I do not now mean that we either see a sun or any other brightness. Only there is a light not seen which illumines the understanding. Illumination, light, and awareness are synonymous terms signifying that the consciousness is penetrated by lucidity. The experience is sought through and through a spiritual certitude which seems to light up the whole inner man, throwing light on all his problems. By different mystic whose lives witness to the union of mind of man with mind of God, the experience has been called inward expansion, an outgoing flight, absorbed inward gazing, divine union, melting into the divine abyss, drenched with spirit, imagineless nudity, profound immersion in God, passing beyond ourselves. St. John of the Cross, this lightening up is the enlightenment of the powers of the soul by this divine contemplation. Spiritual illumination publishes itself in practical efficiency. It clarifies the perception for right judgment and right action, produces states and conditions of well-being, happiness, and prosperity, confers new strength and skill, and promotes man's general welfare. To reach this fount of overcoming power requires the high potential of love toward God. Thus man is challenged at very outset to produce a motive power adequate to climb the spiritual heights. The new world to which he seeks admittance is guarded by law, the law of love toward God, and an active expression in the world, thus opening all the channels for the munificence he seeks. It cannot be bought, nor cajoled, nor intimated, nor commanded. Man earns it by placing his own life in the sacrifice or sacred fire, transmuting it into a living countersign. The old mystics speak of two dark nights, the night of the senses and the night of the spirit. St. John, the first dark night is of the intellect, and is necessary in order that divine intelligence may act direct upon the soul, by detaching it from the web of the lower senses, thus giving it an independent impulse. The denuding process naturally leaves the sense in emptiness and darkness. Why call it dark night? Because divine wisdom is as yet dark as night. It is in this dark night, in the silence, that spiritual knowing and illumination is imparted. Transcendence is an experience of storm and stress for body, mind, and soul, because new forces are entering the consciousness exactly as in the period of adolescence. If during the whole process one holds the emotions firm, determined to know rather than to feel, there will not ensue the dark night of spiritual fatigue. If the emotional temperament is strong, the experience will be strong, and as action and reaction is equal and opposite, a high spiritual state long continued will be followed by fatigue. After a period of rest, the whole human fabric emerges readjusted and stabilized beyond the rise and fall of emotional transports. 2 long, strenuous hours spent in these high currents will lead to fatigue and exhaustion, just as the body becomes overcharged by submitting it to any high-velocity current. One can overdo in any department of life, in study, work, or exercise. Balance must be maintained while one moves forward. If weakness is induced, there is no gain. Any emotional inundation signify loss of power. Knowing God is an individual experience and must be adjusted to individual peculiarities of temperament. The Beatitudes. 4 little words have challenged the spiritual aspirant, wholly misinterpreted by the material mind for a material world. They are humility, obedience, poverty, and charity. The following definition of these vows belongs to the very earliest Christian tradition. The first 3 words have reference to the attitude of the soul toward God, and the last indicates a compensating movement of the divine toward the soul. These words are the spiritual vernacular of a man on his high quest, and apply to the hidden life of the spirit, the living ground of spiritual union with God. These words signify spiritual asceticism, not objective methods of forced starvation and weak resignation in obedience to external domination. Spiritual life is not bought by the giving of alms, but by the giving of self to God. It is easier to do something than to be something. Through extreme external practice, the body may be reduced to weakness, incapable of doing anything. But spiritual asceticism attains to a strength of character and force of will that renders one incapable of evil acts from choice. Love and humility are mutual terms in the spiritual vocabulary. Love of the divine grows as the mind realizes the giver of every good and perfect gift, and dependence upon this resource develops a yearning in the soul for that good, and a humility to be worthy of that munificence. Poverty is the least understood of all. Man begins at once to think of the reluctant surrender of old clothes, of giving money, or becoming a beggar subsisting on the dole of the state or of friends. If there is one law which determines one's duty done before God, it is the law of self-support. Risebrook. There are many gifts of God which are for the good and aid to a source of virtue. These are health, wisdom, beauty, riches, worldly dignity. Original life and spirit needs distributing centers on this plane, and to a soul dedicated to service, no amount of means is deflected as belonging to the self for the self alone, and no amount need be considered too much for intelligent distribution. Spiritual poverty means a conscious realization of how beggared the soul is of spiritual life. It compels the soul to hang on God as the only source. The straight and narrow way is thus defined. Inseverable connection with God, looking neither to the right nor to the left, God alone the giver of all things. Voluntary poverty means renunciation of dependence upon the little personal self, taking hold of higher victorious energies stayed in thought. My soul waiteth in silence for God alone. Spiritual poverty is selfless use of everything one has. St. John of the Cross. I am not speaking of the absence of things, for absence is not detachment. Chastity and poverty mean one and the same thing, complete detachment from the domination of the senses, with the eye single to God, with satisfaction possible only in contemplating perfection and conforming to it. These are the pure in heart. Spiritual poverty is a realization of the utter lack of spiritual wealth and hunger, for it is the hidden treasure of God's presence, and no matter how great may be the certitude of that presence, the soul must perpetually feel its need. Outer destitution is not meant. The human is still in the kindergarten stage, seemingly unable to understand except by objective illustration. Spiritual poverty is of the spirit empty towards God, ever yearning to receive of his fullness. These poor in spirit shall be filled. This opening of the interior life toward God in yearning, asking, and receiving is spiritual love. In early Christian teaching, the earth life was called the place of mystic death, meaning that man had the power to die to his subhuman instincts. A life lived in conscious transmutation of the lower elements of consciousness was called mystic death, and for such there is no second death. Those who go unpurged into the next life, we are told, will experience fire, and true to material interpretation, it has been understood to be objective fire. On this plane, pain and suffering are a means to educate and compel physical man to right action, but his whole mental life is torn with conflicting passion, and unless they are burned out here, they will be compelled to undergo fiery process calculated to consume them. Mankind refuses to bend to the ecclesiastical whip, yet in the secret depth of his heart he longs to hear of some compelling truth that shall open the door of his fool's paradise and give him spiritual certitude. That certitude lies in a new field of experience, in mental and spiritual contact, with new knowledges and powers reinterpreting his place in the universe. Hidden manna. For the word of the cross is the power of God. Jesus laid this spiritual yardstick across human life as its sign of triumph. It was a sign of lifting power. It was his spiritual diagram of evolution, which he used to illustrate the transformation of the Son of Man into a Son of God. Its mathematical proportions, simplicity, and nakedness of outline symbolize the perfect man. Paul identified himself with it as a living, active process for the transformation of the lower elements of consciousness imprisoned in its house of flesh and dominated by the external senses. The inner spiritual man must be released by the crucifixion of the old man on the cross of denial. The cross was used as a sacred symbol by Egyptian priests who called it the tree of life, signifying the process of mystic death to the animal and material selfhood. Just as sacrifice was symbolized of an inner process until materialized by limited minds, so the cross was purely symbolical of transcendence and transfiguration, until mental palsy required the stimulus of visible signs to enable the mind to carry the thought from the external object to the sublime truth hidden beneath the symbol. Thus the body of Christ becomes a wafer to be eaten, wine becomes his blood to drink, and a wooden cross displaces divine alchemy. Verily, mental palsy has crept upon the race. Crucifixion was a common military punishment, and innumerable victims suffered this form of execution. but no other used the experience to convey further knowledge to the race. Spiritually, Jesus abolished death and brought life and immortality to light. His continued life and ascension is an earnest and spiritual destiny of man. The chief priests and the rabbis taught that there was no life beyond the grave. Paul, after his conversion, announced his message as Christ crucified yet living, and not as the disciples did as the gospel, and from his new reevaluation of life elaborated his Corinthian letters on the natural and celestial bodies. His interpretation of symbolism and reality he called mysteries concealed from the foundation of the world, meaning that they were absolutely new to his generation. The cross was a way of life. It degenerated into a symbol of agonizing death by Roman torture, wholly divorced from the purpose and use of spiritual symbol. Jesus passed through death. He said there were other mansions in the Father's house. Though he die, yet shall he live. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. The caterpillar does not lose its life when it becomes a butterfly. It changes its appearance. Spiritual overcoming is an interior process. The last enemy to be overcome is man's fear and ignorance of this transition. Knowledge of God gives strong footholds across the unseen, across which is a great gulf fixed, and none may cross from thence to us, nor from hence to you. To him that overcometh will I give of hidden manna. The soul breathed into man in the beginning is the thing liberated in spiritual consciousness. It is the soul that undergoes suffering in uniting with the lower elements of consciousness. It is the soul that feels spiritual contact, and its crowning work is to lift up and transform all the lower elements of consciousness, and as oft defiled in reclaiming subconscious instincts, as oft restored in reunion with its higher elements in scientific meditation. Merely to exist as human bulk is to be dead spiritually and to possess no anchorage in the hour of need. Try to realize yourself as a soul grown to the present moment by means of 5 avenues of communication, the senses, elaborated and refined through ages of subhuman evolution. Realize that the senses are the legitimate means for receiving external information, and that now, having become familiar with the vehicle of consciousness, its nature and its laws, you are at the point intended, in the beginning, for the reclaiming of all the subhuman lumber that companioned and supported your growth. Establish inseverable relationship with the source of all life and wisdom. In the beginning, God. Lift the inner eye to the superconscious heights and affirm, the infinite intelligence illumines and directs me. Loosen the soul from its narrow prison by reaffirmation of this thought until the mind is steadied, and the soul can listen through the subconscious din to its own higher intelligence. And by persistent identification with the truth of itself, lift itself up and out of the racial depth and recover and restore body, mind, and soul. Thus, regenerating the self regenerates the planet through recharging its atmosphere, lifting etheric wave impulses to a higher potential until the universal ethers are rid of poisonous human emanations. Any knowledge is worth only what it contributes toward the final destiny of the race, placing man's feet firmly on the living ground of a new cycle. Facing man's spiritual destiny, take hold of the consciousness and thrust it forward into the silence, moving forward to transcendence upborne by unfaltering resolve. Into the light, into the heart of the fire, to the innermost core of the deathless fire, I ascend, I aspire. So ends How to Enter the Silence.